have no idea where this will lead us, but I have a definite feeling it will be a place both wonderful and strange.
Hello, and welcome to the wonderful and strange Twin Peaks Logcast. I'm Kalil, and with me today is the tape recorder to my life story.
So I'm just going to sit here and do nothing because I'm the one who's going to receive the information, and you're just going to tell me everything because you're the life story. Like, you do it all. This is your podcast, Kalil. I'm simply the Unplugged Professor here to receive the information and regurgitate it somehow, maybe, unless I break everything inside me.
Today we're talking about the autobiography of FBI Special Agent Dale Cooper, My Life, My Tapes, from the year 1991, as well as Diane, ... Twin Peaks Tapes of Agent Cooper, from the year 1990.
Yes, two little bits of separate media, but also very interesting with them. One of them releasing at basically the start of season 2, and one of them releasing, that being the tape, if you will, of Diane, and one releasing far later, like closer to the
finale of season 2.
Between the finale of season 2 and the release of
Fire Walk With Me.
Yes.
Content warnings. There are going to be some discussions in this podcast episode, as well as in the book itself, on topics of suicide, drug abuse, death of loved ones, and a lot of sexuality, most of which is maybe a bit not everyone's favorite subject matter to listen to on a podcast, but is also not necessarily explicit or super problematic, except there are going to be a few cases in our conversation where it does go into topics of rape. We will keep it pretty minimal, but the book does go over a couple instances involving that. So if that is something you're not comfortable with reading, I would not recommend checking out the book. Trivia today comes from several articles from the website 25 Years Later, Wikipedia, Twin Peaks Wiki, and I read approximately a bunch of Goodreads reviews.
A bunch? What is approximately a bunch?
A bunch of Goodreads reviews. 1 unit of bunch.
It's approximately like 1 unit of bunch. So it's about the area of an amount of things.
Yeah, like if you're hanging out with your friends and your buddy Johnny says, Hey, Professor, can you give me a bunch of bananas from the supermarket?
You gotta say, like, approximately a bunch, though.
I'm saying approximately.
Could you give me about a bunch?
Yeah.
Could you get me maybe a lot?
Before we get too far into the things involving Daleth Coopereth, there are some addendums I wish to make to a previous episode of our Logcast. During our discussion of the Twin Peaks Access Guide, Welcome to Twin Peaks, there were a few subject matters that we had been questioning that we didn't have answers to, and I have come with a few more bits of context. This is a follow-up from after reading John Bernardi's The Only Twin Peaks Access Guide resource you'll ever need on the 25 Years Later website. So shout out to John Bernardi and the amazing resource on 25 Years Later. A lot of the information that I found, unfortunately, I can't share right now because it does tie directly into the secret history of Twin Peaks, the final dossier, and the return. So if that sort of thing interests you, I would check out the article directly if you don't mind those spoilers. One subject matter we had been questioning prior was the release date of the Access Guide and how it might fit into things with the timeline. Because the Access Guide has this sort of weird relationship where it hints at certain things toward the end of Season 2, but then doesn't bring up other things during Season 2. And that was a consistent sticking point of our questioning. So, some context there. The Access Guide was published in June of 1991, and that was the same month that the final episode of Twin Peaks' second season aired. In other words, it was written during Season 2, and released in the same month as the Season 2 finale.
Yeah.
So they would have known things, but very famously, the Season 2 finale also, changed things, on the spot, that David Lynch was making changes to the script, and they didn't have all of the details worked out by the point of the Access Guide, nor would Fire Walk With Me have been worked out in any implications thereof. So when we're thinking about something like Josie, when the book was being written, Josie probably still would have been alive.
Yeah.
And during the book's editing and publishing was probably when the episode would have aired about her death. The exact timeline of when the writers knew what was going to be in the show, I think is a bit hazy, and we'll probably never know the specifics, but there's a reason for that haziness. Quoting John Bernardi here, the timelines of the books are dated from when they were published in the real world rather than the show's year of 1989. while simultaneously syncing up with the TV show's current plot lines and status quo. So part of the confusion also gets added in that it was being used in reference to the publishing year, which would have been, again, that 1991, rather than the show's year, which took place in 1989, which further obfuscates the timeline if you take it to be canon. Is that clear as mud, Professor? The timeline?
It's clear as mud as any sort of timeline can sort of like become, if you will. After all, like the process of anything such as like creating a full-on episode or creating a full-on book is not only a complicated process that can take over a long period of time. I'm just imagining, just say for example, we'll come into instances inside of the book that we have now, which was something that came out before, say, for example, Fire Walk With Me, where we have also these other changes in which is going to muddy some waters. So it's almost fitting, if you will.
Yeah, that's the consistent trend of Twin Peaks media is inconsistency, for sure. Bernardi also notes, I just thought this was funny, so I'm going to include it. Bernardi also notes that if we go by the map on the back of the Welcome to Twin Peaks Access Guide, it would suggest that the Twin Peaks Sheriff Station is on the north side of Upper Twin Park, and the gazebo is on the lower side, no more than 2 blocks away. So when James and Donna decided to trick Jacoby with Maddie wearing the Laura wig, and then Jacoby got attacked in the woods, this would have been completely viewable by any deputy, like Andy. Let's say he went out to go get a breath of fresh air. Andy could have just been standing out in the front steps of the sheriff's department and saw all of this happen. He could have seen all of that happen. That is very funny and speaks to James and Donna's ability to strategize and plan, that they would commit like secret acts of suspicious nature. Again, James had already been in jail due to being suspicious with the Laura Palmer case. And they have, I wouldn't even call it the audacity, I think it's just they didn't really think of what they're doing, that if this map, again, is canon, they were directly within view of anyone who just happened to be walking outside of the sheriff's department. I just thought that was kind of funny.
Oh, no, there's humorous instances. I think wherever you place the sheriff's station, there's going to be a humorous instance. For example, when we were going over the special features, the sheriff's station, the building that they used, is right across the street from where, like, say, for example, they would get, like, shots to the sawmill and so on. So...
The real world locations are not representative of the in-universe town.
It's not, but at the same time, there's a humor in that.
Well, that's what I mean, is that there's that sort of disconnection. If you actually go and visit the real-life locations, they do not match up with where they'd be in the town, but they are there still?
Regardless of, say, for example, when they actually visited, in which they felt that, this very much is... It's almost as if it came to us in a dream, this overall place that it could be represented as Twin Peaks, if you will. It's fun. It's fun.
And something else that John Bernardi noted that Professor and I actually figured out, but we figured it out, like, I want to say it was the day after we recorded the pod. Like, we figured it out. I think I just had a moment of realization staring at the map. But John Bernardi notes it, too, that the Unwin Field Observatory that is in the note at the very end and is also located on the map. You know what those 3 letters, I think make an acronym. Make an acronym out of Unwin Field Observatory. That's just UFO.
UFO. Oh, yes, UFO.
UFO.
Not UNFO.
Not UNFO. Which I just think, again, is one of those funny kind of inside jokes that we caught the, David Lynch, Mark Frost production reference in the private prison section. We did not catch the UFO. The UFO has evaded us. Very unfortunate. Very unfortunate. Which I think that's even more interesting, too, and all the connections you can make between David Lynch and Twin Peaks to Silent Hill is that they both involve UFOs to varying degrees. Right?
Right.
So, again, very special thank you to John Bernardi for that resource. And I'll be referencing a couple other things throughout from 25 years later when it comes to My Life, My Tapes.
Excellent.
Professor, what did you think, in your generalist of general opinions, on My Life, My Tapes as a book?
As a book itself, for one, I gotta say that post-reading it, I'm very happy to see that we're nearly through all of the advertised Twin Peaks material that seems to be combined in this overall, like, final page, or just, like, a sense of, like, oh, yeah, no, if you're thinking about checking out Twin Peaks, here's some more official work. So I think that the only thing that we have left that is in the advertisement pages for these is the overall card art. So I'm feeling fulfilled finishing it. As the content of the overall book, however, it was Generally a fun read. I think that overall, I personally was very engaged with it. I ended up enjoying the content that was provided. It was a book that the way that it's written is in various chunks and so on, in which like each one is a different recording at a different time from a tape recorder, and it's re-recited as heard by Scott Frost and so on, which makes it very easy to pick up and put down. So if I was ever approached, say for example, by yourself, and we suddenly got into a discussion, I could just like, okay, I'm right there on the page. This is the last context of it. That's where that ended. I can close this, move about. So it's very accessible. I will mention, though, that as far as the Twin Peaks books go, and I believe that you and I had this discussion as well, it's one of the ones that is least essential. And it's not to say that it's not a book that I don't enjoy. It's not a book. It is still a book that I do enjoy. It's still a book that I think can connect to Dale Cooper in very fascinating ways and great. But if we, say, for example, made a Twin Peaks package, if you will.
Right, a box set.
A box set, if you will, that had all sorts of like Twin Peaks media, and we had to put stuff in it. You could leave out the Welcome to Twin Peaks. You could leave out the Diane. You could leave out the My Life, My Tapes. But putting in something, say, for example, like the Diary of Laura Palmer, it seems just fitting to incorporate that in the full box set.
It feels core. It feels like the core experience.
Referring to the
Secret Diary of Laura Palmer.
Yes.
And yeah, to carry on your analogy here, yeah, I think that if there was, assuming everything in Twin Peaks was the same type of media for a moment, and it was like, this is the essential Twin Peaks collection, I would feel like they made a mistake if they didn't include the Secret Diary of Laura Palmer, but I would not be angry if they didn't include the other two books we've covered, including My Life, My Tapes, or if they didn't include Diane either.
Yeah.
It'd be cool to have. It feels like DLC. If you're into like video games, it's neat. It's nice. I'm glad to have more Twin Peaks related media to chew on, but it definitely doesn't feel as core of the experience. And in terms of the books, even though I would agree that, you know, Welcome to Twin Peaks is also probably not as essential as The Secret Diary, Welcome to Twin Peaks I can see myself referencing more and going back to more than I can My Life, My Tapes.
I think that as far as My Life, My Tapes, I can reference back in a sense of a core of, like, say, for example, Dale Cooper's character looking into, like, season 1 and season 2 and finding personal connections with that. I think that it is a very fun work. You used the overall example of DLC, if you will. I think that it's good recontextualizing material in which like someone can hold on to and make a good argument with. I think that seeing these pieces and works as potential alternate realities in order to delve into the characters, because there are some inconsistencies that could be referred to as like later retcons.
And how big of an issue that's going to be depends on how much you really care about the sanctity of canon.
Yeah.
In a series like Twin Peaks, which I think automatically is self-sabotaging even within like just the mainline material. I put mainline in quotation marks. Even if you only watch the show and Fire Walk with Me, you're already going to be seeing some inconsistencies and some confusing timelines. Whether you then want to view these books as alternate realities, part of the same reality, somewhere hazy in between, the magician calls out, whatever, it's all open territory.
Yeah.
But there definitely, like you said, there are inconsistencies enough that it doesn't one-to-one match up, in particular with Fire Walk with Me when it comes to My Life, My Tapes.
Yeah.
There are a bit of major conflicts.
Yeah. I think that overall this is just adds to a compelling tragedy to Cooper's character, in which I do like. I will also mention that it very much feels like a young Sheldon out of a Big Bang Theory. Two series I don't personally like, but at the same time, you are taking a younger version of Dale Cooper running his overall life from age 13 to the point that he goes into Twin Peaks.
I don't know if
and
any
his
other
overall vernacular and his overall desire to record these things on things such as these little tape recorders are present. The character of Dale Cooper, which makes sense, stays persistent, if you will, through it. But there's a high spike of just general intelligence of a 13-year-old that is emphasized inside of this.
I'm much more mixed on this book. It sounds like you had a more positive experience with it than I did. I'm very mixed. I don't dislike the book. I don't want to throw it away. I don't want to burn it. There's enough fire in this book without me burning it. It does feel to me in a way like it's a limited work. Whereas I feel that Welcome to Twin Peaks and The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer feel more self-contained and have an individual identity, and they work really well to me as just works in of themselves.
Yeah.
It feels like this book in particular requires you to be a bit more into the universe of Twin Peaks and the characters at base to get a lot out of it. And I think you can argue it feels a bit more fan servicey, which again is weird because the Access Guide is literally just like the town and the people in it. But there's just a way in which this is written that it doesn't always line up with, I guess, the priorities I wish it had. Some examples, the element of Diane, right, who is receiving the addressed tapes, doesn't appear until 125 pages in to a book that's like, 170 pages, right? So it's very late in. And along those same notes, Cooper doesn't begin being in the FBI until later, which means that the bulk of this book does not really go through Cooper as an investigator, as a detective, which I might find more interesting. But instead it goes a lot more into these relationships. That's fine, except that the relationship I am most interested in when it comes to Cooper's past, Caroline, there's actually very little. I would argue that the Caroline relationship in this book is much less developed than the Annie relationship in the show. And the Annie relationship in the show is criticized often for being kind of rushed. It's like, if you're writing a book about Cooper's past and his tapes, wouldn't you want to explore Caroline as a character? She feels like a plot device to me. So I am more mixed on the things that I think it needed to do to really sell it on me. It didn't quite hit the landing on that. Instead, it just kept shoving pies and donuts in my face and coffee and being like, look, it's Cooper. He said damn fine. Look, it's Cooper.
Yeah.
Which I don't know, was a little bit upset about that. A little bit upset about that. My favorite thing about this book, though, to kind of flip over, though, I do enjoy how this can be utilized as a tool for understanding Dale Cooper's character in the show. If you take these characters to be one and the same, if you take Dale Cooper to be the same in the show as he is in this book, it lets you recontextualize a lot of the relationships in his life and a lot of the interactions he has in the show with a new mindset. Because you can be in the back of your mind thinking, okay, well, given what we know about Cooper now, how does that help explain how he talks to Audrey, for example? I like that the book can be used as a resource like that. That's really neat. The same way that the diary can be used when you're watching Fire Walk with Me to interpret Laura from a different perspective.
Yeah.
So as a resource like that, I quite enjoy it. As a book on its own, I think if someone randomly picked this book up and they hadn't read Twin Peaks, hadn't watched Twin Peaks, I feel like this book does not work very well on its own. In my mind.
In my overall mind, I would say that I do agree in the sentiment that this one has a harder time getting legs. I think that the Access Guide still has a little bit more.
It'd be really funny if someone picked up the Access Guide without knowing about Twin Peaks. Like,
Exactly.
oh, it sounds like a really neat town. I'd love to go visit this town of Twin Peaks. That'd be funny.
I still think that this one is still able to be picked up more. I think that the structure of it would be a little bit too off-putting, if you will, from just generally someone who passes by it. And maybe by terms of that, in which like this being very heavily reliant on something like Twin Peaks on an engagement level, maybe why one of the reasons it may have overall disappeared and succumbed. I think that as far as the content of
You're
it goes,
referring to how it hasn't been reprinted.
it has been reprinted like the other works, or as reference, if you will.
And we should get out of the way right away that you do have a physical copy of the book.
I do, actually.
You got very lucky.
I
and
got
it
very
for a good
fortunate.
price.
Not only that, I got this book. I got a handwritten letter from the person who sent me the book that was used. And that person, they also included the physical tape for Diane, My Life, My Tapes. It was very heartfelt.
Yeah.
It was very kind, and I teared up. Like,
and this book is kind of hard to get a hold of.
This is hard to get a hold of, but this was also, as a little bit of background context, I'm pretty sure I picked this up at the end of like season 1 while we were recording the podcast. And when I just like experienced that from just like a fan of the overall media of Twin Peaks, who is just nearly a complete stranger, just kind of like showed off that kindness. I think that most certainly had a large impact on me continuing on into the series, just from the sentimentality from it all. So, no, that was brilliant. But to go back,
yeah, this book has fallen out of print, and the Access Guide, I understand, that might be expected, because I remember reading along the way in the research that the publisher for the Access Guide doesn't usually republish their Access Guides, and that does feel like kind of a time and a place sort of deal. But The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer has gotten re-released, reprinted. There's like audiobook version that has Cheryl Lee doing the voices, right?
Yeah.
This does not have that treatment.
It does not have that treatment. At first, I was even thinking to myself that potentially like an audiobook format would be very fun for this because of all the various instances, especially dialogue and banter that goes back and forth inside of it. After listening to Diane, I hope they leave out the constant clicking because of the click, 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 click that occurs into Diane's tapes to show off that this is a tape recorder.
What'd you think of Diane, by the way?
Diane?
Yeah, the tape that you just got done clicking about.
The tape. So,
because I also listened to the Audible audio version on Amazon. I didn't mind the clicking, to be honest. I appreciated the audio format, getting to hear Dale Cooper's voice. I thought what was most striking about it, though, is the use of like atmospheric ambient sound effects. When Dale Cooper's on a plane, you hear him on that plane.
So, I will say for two different ends, it's going back a little bit. Just judging on the content of the book, the tone of Cooper's voice I still think is consistent between both of them. I think that there's a fair amount of time that deals with the more immaturity of Dale Cooper as he's overall going through adolescence and so on. I think
In My Life, My Tapes?
Inside of My Life, My Tapes, yes. I think that there's something that I do enjoy from that. I think that if I had more... I think the least interesting things, personally, were probably the things inside of his FBI time. And maybe that could have just used some refinement if that was like the main focus and so on in the hypothetical universe.
I think it's disappointing that it was the weakest part, is what I think we can agree on that.
I think we can agree on that, yes.
Meet in the middle in that way.
I think that the overall dialogue that's used without all the characters, especially whenever it comes to women in his life, it makes Carolyn feel adjacent to someone such as Annie inside the series.
You're talking about Diane or My Life, My Tapes right now?
Still talking about the autobiography, Dale Cooper, My Life, My Tapes. I'm getting to Diane, I promise.
Oh, okay. I was just making sure, because I don't remember them bringing up Caroline much in the Diane tape.
Yeah,
so.
No. I just more so... just talking about, because even like Annie does come up inside of like the second season of Twin Peaks, if you will. I think that the only established relationship Dale Cooper does have that I can be convinced could have been potentially healthy was like the early times of Lena. We'll get to Lena later.
Lena later.
Yep. But as far as Diane goes, Diane listening to that with their sort of like post-relationship context inside the book was nice. I do think that if you are to experience both these media, I would recommend the autobiography before going into Diane rather than vice versa. But if you just experience Diane on your own, you're still going to get plenty of nice fan service.
The majority of Diane is stuff that was already in the show.
A majority of it's in the show. Some of the dialogue is expanded on. Some of it is brand new dialogue. For what it does provide and what is re-recorded, for one, I think it's fun. I think that it's well worth its $5 price point. I don't know. I can't see myself spending more other than the Audible price right now of like $5 onto it. I'm glad that the cast came back together for this audio format because it's so good to hear back from Truman when I have not seen him in a single special feature.
Well, that was just a recording, I'm pretty sure, from the series.
Then I'm sad to hear that. I thought
the
it
Lucy
sounded...
one, I think,
thought it sounded more
new.
crisper. Maybe it was just like... Maybe it was just like a good way of refashioning it. Yeah. Whatever happened to Truman's actor, I don't know.
Yeah.
But... yes, there were re-recordings happening for the overall dialogue, and it's a fun novelty.
I view it as a piece of merch. You know, I don't know the context when it was sold, where and how and when and who and why. I mean, obviously in the book, they market it to you the same way the other books. But
it's a fun idea for a novelty in merchandise because it's literally a tape you can pick up.
What I'm getting at is it's not a complete work the way that the books have been.
No.
It is not an audio book. It is on Audible, but it feels, because it's a 40-minute collection anthology of recordings, it feels like a greatest hits tape more than it feels like a complete work. And it doesn't really tell a complete story. It just kind of stops.
It adds a little bit to the story, I would argue. At certain portions, like say, for example, we'll get into it when talking about more, but say, for example, flying. But I think it adds to, again, a novelty. But it's not something that's going to be... We're not going to dive crazily into Diane as much as we're going to do with My Life, My Tapes as a comparative work, if you will.
I think it's cool that it exists.
Yeah.
It's just that of the works that are out there, I think it's interesting that this one is able to be accessed on Audible in a more modern format, where My Life, My Tapes is just this abandoned product that you can get for like used for like $60 US currently, and that's about where you're going to find it for most places. It's neat. It seems like a collector's item. It's for diehard fans, I would say, most of all. I would not say it's something casually that is, again, using that sort of word on essential. One problem that I think both, for my listening, at least in my reading, one problem that I think is there between both Diane and My Life, My Tapes is it's a lot of Cooper. And I mean, obviously, no duh, it's about Cooper and both of them. Cooper's my favorite character in Twin Peaks. That hasn't changed since my first viewing. But he works best with other people. Like, I enjoy Cooper most in the show when he's working with Truman, when he has that back and forth with Harry Truman, or when he has that back and forth with Audrey, or he has that back and forth with Wyndham Earle. And the My Life, My Tapes does have sections in it where it's written more like a script, and it has Dale, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Wyndham, blah, 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 blah. Those are my favorite parts. I like when it goes into a play-by-play with two characters. It just doesn't happen a lot. And when it does, it's usually used to show Wyndham Earle's degrading psyche. It's not being used for conversation in a more literal sense. It's being used almost as an expositional tool. I like it, but it's like, I want more of other characters with Cooper, and that's not a, like, inherent objective flaw. This is literally what it says on the tin. This is Dale Cooper's tapes. Other people are not recording tapes very much with him.
It's just the difference between, like, the strengths of the character, I think. I think that the big strength of Dale Cooper as a character is straight man with quirks, if you will. He is someone who is so inside the ends of the straight man, in which, like, he will overanalyze at certain points, or he will end up falling into his own habits.
He's so specific and precise to the point of comedy.
That when it comes to, like, the realities of Twin Peaks and when that sort of, like, hits him, that's what creates either a humor or a larger engagement with the character.
And when you just have him on his own for an entire book or for 40 minutes straight with nothing else, he gets to be less Dale Cooper and more stale Cooper.
For you.
For me.
I think that it just more so gets malaise Cooper, like you exist in this.
That's not a pun, though.
I mean, like, you exist in the Cooper space, but I'm not getting more negative on it.
I never felt it with Laura's stuff for a couple reasons. I mean, with Laura's Palmer Diary.
For one, like, the big thing about Laura's Palmer Diary is that like, as opposed towards Dale Cooper. For one, Laura Palmer's character, prior, at the very least,
she's
to
dead
Firewalk
for
with
the
Me,
show.
She's dead for the show. There's plenty to explore and expand on and try to play with. There's plenty of character dynamic that can be worked through. There's an intrigue there. And even if, say, for example, you have it after Firewalk with Me, she's
still a private person in Firewalk with Me. You don't necessarily know what's always going on in her thoughts. She'll say some things to, like, Donna. But even then, it's always clear in her relationship, she never says everything to any one person. There's something she'll tell Donna. There's something she'll tell Bobby. There's something she'll tell James. A little bit to Harold. But we never get the full picture. So the diary is still very good, even after Firewalk with Me.
The consistency between that and Firewalk with Me is that the core of Laura Palmer is internal conflict.
Yes.
That is just the character.
Whereas Dale Cooper, he talks a lot. And so having 40 minutes of audio of him just talking to himself, mostly in the diary form, the Diane format, I don't know if it's as conducive. And it's not to say it's badly written. I think that Scott Frost, because he didn't write. It says in My Life, My Tapes, it says, My Life, My Tapes, it says as heard by Scott Frost.
Yes.
It doesn't say written by. And that's not even on the cover. That's on the inside page. So to the cover, it would make it seem like there is no author.
Yeah, there's no Scott Frost on any angle of this book.
The spine or the back even?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
No, just on, like, after you open it, it says the autobiography.
Autobiography?
Yeah, autobiography of FBI Special Agent Dale Cooper. And it's not on that page. After that page, it says, again, the autobiography of FBI Special Agent Dale Cooper, My Life, My Tapes, and then, like, much smaller font, as heard by Scott Frost.
And I don't think Scott Frost really cared about the credits too much, because in the Diane tape, I don't even think he's credited at all. He's just kind of the shadow author.
Yep.
So he also wrote the Cooper dialogue that was new in this. And this also connects to Scott Frost's history with the series. So Scott Frost is not only the son of the actor who plays Doc Hayward, Warren Frost, and the brother of Mark Frost, co-creator. He also wrote 2 of the episodes of the original show. So Scott Frost's episodes are episodes 15, which is after Maddie's death. It's the one right after where Leland gets to be all sinister and sly.
Oh.
So he wrote an episode where Leland, mwahahaha, and then he also wrote episode 21, which deals a lot with Wyndham Earle and Caroline. That's where a lot of that backstory comes through.
Yeah.
When you know that this is the dude who was responsible for the Bob mwahaha and also the Wyndham Earle Caroline stuff, it makes sense why he would do what he's doing with My Life, My Tapes.
Yeah.
And he has experience writing for Dale Cooper specifically. He also apparently wrote an episode for the short-lived series On the Air, which also was a Frost Lynch production. So he did write an episode for that.
Okay.
He would go on to write a mystery thriller series based on a character named Alex DeLillo, a Pasadena homicide detective and single mother. Not too sure about that, but he has had a history of writing afterward is all I'm getting at. So, yeah, Scott Frost, I think, does a good job with Dale Cooper's dialogue. It's just that when it's all him all the time, that's where I am mixed.
Yeah.
It seems like, in general, the fan base is kind of mixed on this particular work, this particular story.
Okay.
When I was looking at the Goodreads reviews, it had like a 4-ish star average.
4-ish out of
5. But
which I would usually
that's mostly good. But it's mostly a mix of like a lot of 4 and 5 star reviews out of like super fans who just want more Twin Peaks and are like foaming at the mouth for more Twin Peaks. And then there's like 1 out of 5 star reviews sprinkled in that are like, this book is absolute trash. So I feel like that's my understanding of the fan reception now in the age of the internet. When this first came out, I don't know in that regard. If anyone listening has context on like what it was like reading this book in the 90s before we got, the more modern take on Twin Peaks, I'd be curious.
Yeah.
But from what I'm kind of looking at, it seems like nowadays there's sort of a split. 1, people don't know this thing exists because it's not in print anymore. And 2, the moment they do know, they're probably looking for anything they get their hands on with Twin Peaks. And this is more Twin Peaks, more Dale Cooper.
Are you trying to say something about me?
I'm trying to say something about both of us, really, honestly. But yeah, there's sort of this divide going on where the people who don't like it don't feel like it is Dale Cooper. And the most common critique I'm seeing is people disliking this book's take on Cooper as this sort of sex-crazed, morally empty character in their eyes. Like, he's someone who doesn't have the compassion and heart and sense of humor that they're used to from Cooper. And we can kind of hash that around as we go through the many different relationships in Cooper's life.
Yeah.
But that is a common critique that I am seeing. Quick side note is that one of the articles I was seeing in 25 Years Later, entitled The Damsels and His Distress, Examining the Loves of Dale Cooper from My Life, My Tapes, written by Brian Allen. It goes through, and you can, again, read the whole thing if you're interested. It goes through the idea of Dale Cooper as the white knight kind of trope, that he is someone who goes out of his way to protect others, especially young women, to the point of it being possibly a fault. And the author, Brian Allen, ultimately concludes that Dale has some of those knightly qualities and is kind of a romantic, but in My Life and My Tapes, most of the women in his life were not in need of saving. Dale was not trying to save them all, and many of these women were very strong and independent in their own regard. But the fact that he even felt, the urge to write this is because he sees people who are on the side of criticizing Dale Cooper's weakness as being so wanting to protect and whatever, they'll go to this book as a reference guide. So there's kind of a debate between how this book portrays Dale Cooper in general. What did you think about the way Dale Cooper is portrayed in My Life, My Tapes, and I guess in Diane a little too? Do you feel like it's like the Dale Cooper you know from the show, or do you feel like this is a change?
I feel that overall there is change. Most certainly. I think that there is a change because we're going through a large chunk of like Dale Cooper's life. This is like 13 all the way to the point that he goes off to Twin Peaks. And though he's still a what seems to be a younger adult when it comes to arriving in Twin Peaks, there still was a life that was in between. It's a very like humanizing, at the very least, way of showing Dale Cooper when it comes to, say, for example, a younger puberty-esque individual.
Puberty-esque?
Puberty-esque, if you will. There's still moments in which I would say that he leaks through, especially whenever it comes to like his individual studies, if you will, in which does aid to it. But as you mentioned before, I think that the biggest weakness that we don't get to see a lot of that sort of like heart emphasized is going to be like, say, for example, when he's working off of other people and their conflicts and their overall discussions, things that we may not see or even like outright show that they've gotten omitted due to one reason or another, whether it's fire, whether it is like Dale Cooper's off doing something, etc., etc. I think that the things that come through are probably the things that are foremost or things that are occupying his mind, his conflicts personally, and that can be the lonely or the desire of a romantic angle in which he feels mostly alienated from. So in that sort of like area, I still do think that I'm getting an expanded Coop, if you will. I still think that there are elements of that protection that still leak through, especially whenever he gets more into the service and trying to see that mixing his work and trying to also protect is a complicated mess in which is likely going to hurt him in the end, in which he keeps falling into. There's 3 outright examples that you can outright see towards the end of the overall book. So yeah, no. That's the way that I see it at the very least.
Again, I'm like most things with this book. I'm kind of split. I don't feel like any of the changes are breaking or turning Dale Cooper into like an OC. But I do think that there are differences. I do feel like this version of Cooper is way more preoccupied with these relationships than we may have gotten indication from the show. And you can view that as a negative in the sense that the book is deviating. It's not my Cooper you're talking about. But you could also take it the other way around, that it's revealing another side of him, that if you choose to accept his canon, really does recontextualize the way he is in the show. And I think that's interesting. The way I would kind of differentiate it is that the Cooper of the show seems like a romantic. The Cooper of this book seems horny. And that's not to say the romantic isn't there. He's preoccupied by sex in a way that in the show, he might, lying on the ground from a bullet wound at the end of season 1 going to season 2, he might lie there saying he wishes to make love to a beautiful woman who he loves very much. But it never took it as like, oh, geez, Dale, get sex off your mind. You're being shot right now. I mean, this book is a bit different in that regard.
I mean, it's almost inside the respect, if I may, whenever someone thinks of like a surface level of something like the Shakespeare, the Great Bawd's Tales, whenever it comes down to like the romantic tale of something like Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, no, that's nonsense. It's all sex jokes.
It is filled with all sorts of horny, but still, he's remembered for a sense of fondness. He is overall evoked with this sense of romance, when it is very horny when you get down into the dirty.
Shakespeare doesn't hide it, though.
He doesn't hide it.
Dale Cooper, if the way he's doing these tapes in the My Life, My Tapes, he's saying to quote unquote Diane, because he does acknowledge that a lot of times he's just talking to himself and just saying Diane in there. But
there's a comfort in it.
Yeah, there's a comfort in it. But he's basically giving his real thoughts as an autobiography. He's being a bit more candid to the recorder. And he's also, like you said, puberty, what'd you say, puberty-ish?
By the point we get to the Diane portions, he's less puberty. Like there's maybe one instance in which it comes through. But everything beforehand.
Yeah, doing it during his like pubescent stage as a teenager. Yeah, it's stereotypical, the idea of a teenage boy having sex on his mind. That is not surprising. I think it's only surprising in context of Dale Cooper.
Yeah.
Of the specific character we're being given.
Yeah.
And the book is never as explicit and taboo as The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer. But again, you go in with different expectations about Laura than you do Dale Cooper. I say use a generality, but Cooper evokes a certain type of image that when you read this book, I could see someone really not liking this variation on that image.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of young women in Dale Cooper's life, starting from the beginning and working their way almost to the end. There's hardly a point where he's not either pursuing a relationship or in the midst of one that is in peril. It's almost the entire book, something is happening with him and his love life. It is very consistent, as consistent as the FBI, if not even more so.
I would say that at the very least, when it comes to the absence, that at the very least shows how much of an importance of this.
There's a pining.
There is pine.
Pine cones.
Wood.
The first girl is Marie or Mary. How do you say it?
It's written out.
It's written.
Who cares?
I'm gonna say it's Marie.
Mari.
Oh no. I'm doing Marie Schlerman. Dale, I believe, is 13 at this time, judging by the entries, and she was 14 when he met her. And Dale first met her, quote unquote, by seeing her dancing through the window of her bedroom, while he is on his surveillance duty. And it basically just frightens him seeing this.
It very much reminds me of like the Horn Boys, if you will, inside the TV series, in which like they are seeing and viewing this, if you will, except
the woman dancing, right?
The woman dancing.
Yeah, I wonder if that was almost an influence, because that might have already been, that would have been an episode that probably would have aired by the time that this book was being written. So at the very least would have been recorded. He notes that her knees are not the knees of a gangster, though. So he's determined that Marie is not a member of the gang. She is a safe person, although he does speculate that she could beat him up in a fight if needed.
In reference, there is a gang involved inside the town Cooper comes from that stole his recorder at one point. So yeah.
And young Cooper, just like young Sheldon, I don't know if it's just like young Sheldon.
don't.
I haven't watched young Sheldon. But young Cooper is worried that these feelings, this onset of puberty, would in some way disqualify him from becoming a full Tenderfoot Scout. There's a sort of guilt that comes along with his sexuality, that he's just not sure if it's the right thing. He's confused by it. In his own naivete, later on, she helps him receive his first merit badge for knot tying. And I'm going to say naivete because I don't think he realized the implications of what he's doing. Maybe he did, but she let him practice on her by tying her up in her bedroom. And that was basically the way in which he learned how to tie his knots.
Yep.
And then she was going to try to tie him to the bedpost, but it wasn't the right kind of knot, so he's able to slip through.
Early Mari, whoever, may be invocative on accelerating the sexual... Because at first, like, the relationship between him and Mary is his avoidance of some of the advances as...
He's cautiously interested.
Cautiously interested. That's a better way to say it.
He notes it. He wouldn't talk about it. Yeah.
But she is very horny as a child. Like, they're both children. They're both
going through puberty and hormones.
They're both going through puberty and hormones, so there's instances like that. But regardless, it seems that she's really pushing these advances constantly in the early Mary sections.
Yeah. And there was a situation that happened where he noticed that she was kissing this other guy named Darren, and Marie told him, hey, I can't talk to you until you're older, and kind of just putting Dale on pause because he wasn't really picking up on the signals, it doesn't seem like. Which later on, after the assassination...
Not too far later, by the way.
Not too far later. Time is relative. But after Bobby Kennedy's assassination, we're in the 1960s right now, that had a pretty big impact on the community as a whole, and Marie specifically because she was, wearing a Kennedy button. She had those sort of beliefs and ideologies in sort of the youth politics of the Kennedys. And when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, it really affected Marie. And she ended up taking Dale's hand, walking over to the corner, kissing him on the lips, then crying and running away. So that was kind of his first kiss, was with Marie at that time.
Yep.
Later, Marie returns from vacation, and things have changed with this girl. Again, we're in the 60s, and the book is very clear on that because she's going full flower power. She's got this big yellow flower on her forehead painted. And Dale's like, oh, I got to meet Hoover because he went on these little shenanigan visits with the FBI earlier. And she's like, wow, you're an establishment pig.
Yeah.
And just breaks his heart. And he's like, she says, you're never going to receive her nirvana. You're never going to achieve nirvana.
Yeah, she's giving off these strange responses, being dismissive and being very random-esque. And it's later discovered, if you will, that she's involved with a lot of drugs.
Yeah, I don't know if it's clear on the timeline. Probably by this point, yes.
Yes.
If not shortly after, the hippie movement. And I think the way that My Life, My Tapes navigates politics is kind of interesting. I would mostly label it as slight irreverence. It's not irreverent the way that Welcome to Twin Peaks makes fun of everything and is super sarcastic all the time.
Yeah.
But the entire counterculture movement between, the Nixon impeachment or the sort of anti-war protesting or protesting involving, draft dodging, or the stuff that's going on with, the father, later Dale's father, giving the land back to the indigenous people. It's handled with a sense of humor in that most of the times it leans into a sort of silliness with the characters. I don't think the book is saying anything against those political policies, but a lot of times the hippies are more distracted and ineffective in what they're doing. They're just kind of yelling or talking nonsense, and Dale is just kind of left to be like, okay.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Yeah.
So he doesn't really take Marie that seriously, and when it finds out that she was involved with drugs, by the time he learns about it, she's already OD'd. The headmaster believes it was an OD, and it sounds like it certainly was. She was taken to the hospital, and it sounds like it's gotten to her pretty bad. She's been really hooked on the drugs.
She's so hooked to the point that she's willing to overall beg for Cooper to try to release her from her bindings that they're keeping her at this overall hospital, and even willing to push her body and try to use that as a bargaining chip before, I suppose the best word is feral, on Cooper as a reaction, biting and so on.
Which causes Dale to remark, quote, "This is not the same Marie that I tied up a year earlier." That's true. It is very, very, very much
true.
a different
every section that sort of involves Marie at this point seems to be a shifting and
constantly
changing.
changing.
Yes.
Almost a month later, Dale receives a letter from Marie in the clinic that she's locked in where she apologizes. She says that now she only wants drugs once or twice a day instead of all the time. She makes this friend with this poet who ends up hanging himself. It reminds me of a bit of Harold, I guess, in that regard. But we don't get to know much of the poet and his character. But it affects Marie enough that another one of those changes is set in place, and she becomes a born-again Christian, which defines her character moving forward. Transitioning from sort of the psychedelic peace hippie movement into sort of a evangelical movement of some kind as well. One of the parts I thought was kind of funny and shows that irreverent tone again was this Valentine that he gets from her. Dale Cooper says, quote, "Received a Valentine today. A large drawing of Marie in her cheerleading uniform holding baby Jesus. Wasn't sure what to think." I really like that.
It's a fun sort of point, but still, using Marie's character, I thoroughly enjoy this arc that goes through, because this overall, what I would argue to be a very tragic character, is that after she is just trying to grow up and with her overall family's lifestyle, begins to feel like she's losing control. First, she uptakes anything that she can take as a personal control, takes that way too far, and then ends up like falling out with that. And eventually, I would argue she also pushes the angle of like letting it go to a higher power, if you will, like releasing that control and pushing forward these overall Christian beliefs in order to try to find more peace for herself, but even takes that too far at various angles of the book, if you will.
Yeah, to the point where she suggests that astronauts will find God on the moon.
And God says, hey, no.
God will tell them to go back where they belong. Again, God will set these boundaries of what people can do, and that humanity's gone too far with the science.
Yep.
Again, very curious, interesting belief structure.
Which I thoroughly enjoy the scene that happens afterwards when the moon landing sort of occurs, and she takes the little beanbag chair out into the middle, and she just has a deep conversation with Cooper that at first seems like it's going to go like lean back into like romantic angle, or just like bring more semblance of what Mary seemed to exhibit from Cooper's perspective before she falls back into wanting to do group prayer with Cooper, almost in like a panic state for like a couple hours after talking about the moon for a bit.
Yeah, I thought it was a very sweet experience, and I think very formative. Like within the My Life, My Tapes, there is a sense that certain elements of his life are repeated enough that you know their significance. Other ones you're kind of left to individually, as a reader, mull over how much you think they weigh in his mind. He doesn't constantly bring up the moon landing with Marie and the hand holding for 2 hours. Like one of the last things we ever get involving Marie's family toward the very end of the book, it might be the last thing he ever says about them, is he talks about the Schlerman family moving away. And he says that, I don't know what happened to her beanbag chair. So clearly the beanbag chair lingered with him, and I don't think it's because he liked that chair.
Yeah.
I think it's because that memory with Marie under the stars, under the moon.
Sprawled out, her legs being visible, and so on.
Well, I think it less of the sensuality. I think in terms of the prayer almost being more of an element, the sort of spirituality, because while she took the spirituality in a very extreme way, this was before Dale went on his own spiritual journey. This is before he really understood these things. And I think that just being in that simple quiet with her for 2 hours in a moment of peace, I'm assuming it's one of the most peaceful memories and moments he probably has, to be honest. And considering the tragedy that Marie gets involved with, I think it's probably one of the most happy memories he would have with her. But I'm sure it was formative in a lot of ways. Much later on, after the moon landing, Marie's family and Dale's family go on a trip together, during which time Marie lures Dale away into the forest. Notably, it is a forest where this takes place, and all the implications for the show therein. And she ends up taking off her clothes and kind of leaving them as a trail, which brings Dale to her eventually, and she is naked, and she asks if he believes in God before kissing him.
Yep, he by the way, lies.
He lies.
He says that yes, and then...
Yeah. And then she starts to perform oral sex, and then this was coinciding with the 4th of July night. So what ended up happening, and I was kind of confused at this section reading it.
At first I was like, what, warfare suddenly comes in? Because it says that rockets suddenly rain down upon them. I was like, where are we?
God was not happy about this. No, but there was just it was again the fireworks,
Heaven
right?
admits war from the moon.
Yeah, but no, there was warfare and of the rocket variety from 4th of July, and it ended up knocking Dale over, sending Marie screaming. And they started like picking up whatever clothing they could that wasn't destroyed.
Because the thing is that was happening, that was getting destroyed, is that a wildfire was occurring thereafter. It was a large fire that began
really weird
erupting.
that you just punctuated the word fire for no reason in particular.
No reason whatsoever.
Also, completely coincidental, not at all important. Don't read into this at all. Shortly after the fire and the sex that had occurred, 10 days later, Marie drowned at Promised Land Lake.
Yep.
Don't read into the name Promised Land Lake. Don't read into the fire. Don't read into the sex. It's all completely incidental. Nothing to do with Dale Cooper and his curse.
Yeah, like a curse. That's the best way to describe what's happening with Dale Cooper.
Marie hit her head while diving and no one was around. And by the time they found her, it was too late.
Yeah.
Quoting Dale, "I do not believe in goodness in the world anymore. What is good either dies or is killed. I know that if I had been there, I could have saved her. I also know that it does not matter, and wanting something to be different will not make it so.
Yeah.
Marie is dead, and I feel empty and sad." And Dale ends up telling his dad that he feels guilty, that he feels like maybe if he had actually been in love with Marie, if he had really been in love with her, maybe she'd be alive in some way. He kind of blames himself for what happened.
Yeah.
And his dad responds by saying that the only way love ever affects death is in making it more painful. What do you think of that? I don't know if you call it advice, but what do you think of that statement from Dale's father to Dale himself? Dale.
I think that it's very interesting and potentially formative. I know that later in the book, Cooper does land on like ideas that believes that yes, love will conquer all. Love is something that could conquer evil, and that's something again thematically happening towards the end of the series. But I think that again puts a tragedy onto the character. I think that the thing that's is communicated more often than not is the pain that love can give when conflicted with horrifying forces.
Dale goes through different ideologies and kind of conclusions by the end, but the book never necessarily tells you if he's right or wrong. His track record is inconsistent, and the consistencies that are there don't look great. Dale tends to leave in his wake, incidentally, suffering.
Yes.
And by the end, he may feel that love can conquer all, but along the way, he doubts a lot.
It's a beautiful sentiment, and in some ways, like, there can be all sorts of things told, but more often than not in Twin Peaks, I think a great example that I would like to bring forward, unless, like, it's really trying to push romantic love as an angle. I know that you and I have talked about, like, friendly love, but if we think of, like, familial love, going back into things, materials with Fire Walk With Me and so on, I would argue that Leland adores and deeply loves his overall child, but he is able to be tormented, succumbed, and fall into this realm of darkness, despite like the fact that love is something present.
Even after all this time, I feel like dissecting Leland versus Bob is so hard.
Yeah.
Because you get mixed messages. You
get so many mixed messages.
Is Leland, and this is a whole tangent, but my response to you in general would be that more of that questioning, how much is Leland, how much is Bob, can you separate them? I remember reading somewhere, and I wish I could give the proper credit. I think it was over a Facebook discussion, though, so I don't remember the exact name, but someone was talking about, with regards to Bob, could Bob just be sort of a manufactured identity or idea that not just Leland comes up with to mask his own guilt, like creating Bob as a construct? It's not me doing that, it's Bob doing that, as a way of distancing himself from his own sin. But it could also be a creation of Laura simultaneously. It's not my father doing that, it's Bob. It's kind of this construct, the way they were wording it, of trying to mask the fact that the daughter doesn't want to know her father's doing this, and the father doesn't want to know he's doing this. And they kind of mutually create this barrier of ignorance. That falls away, though, the moment you start getting into lore of Bob, the moment you start seeing Bob as a physical entity, or as Albert Rosenfeld said in a moment of not being his own character, is it just the evil that men do? So there is competing ideas. I think that's a very compelling thought, what that person, who I wish I could credit what they said. I like that idea a lot, but I don't think it holds up to everything in Twin Peaks. And that's kind of the ambiguity of that element. So yeah, I don't think, does love conquer all in Twin Peaks? Even in individual cases, it gets really messy. Mm-hmm. It's a series that's interested in the question, though. Mm-hmm. For sure. Mm-hmm. Years later, Dale has a dream where he hears Marie's voice saying, "Please, I'm not ready." And Dale notes, quote, "I wish Marie was at peace, but I do not think she is at this time. And I wonder what it is that she knows that those in the physical world can never understand."
Yeah, it's like Marie keeps popping up in a very strange spiritual, dreamlike way.
And this is where
it's fun.
It, again, on the element of subjectivity, and I'm going to pose it as two hypotheticals and then ask which one you lean toward.
Okay.
You know, do you believe that these dreams are premonitions of truth, that Marie's spirit or soul is a real thing, that Dale is tapping into a sort of spiritual awareness, and then when he has these dreams, it is Marie's spirit caught, unable to advance in a state of limbo, like Josie in the wood, right? Or is the dream a reflection of his own psychology? It is a dream, that is it, but it's revealing more about Dale's guilt, that Dale imagines there being this Marie who can't move on because he can't move on. Which side do you take more? Is it a real thing, Marie's spirit, or is it Dale's own psyche?
Yes.
You see what I'm saying, though?
I know what
both
you're saying.
answers are compelling.
Both answers are very compelling.
And
you
they
can
both
draw a
do
lot
things.
through that.
They both reveal things.
They do reveal things. I think that, especially in the latter end, I would have to say, is where I find the most compelling items myself, because I do firmly feel that there's multiple examples in which you can draw maybe something that he may not fully admit verbally and so on, but I can see him seeing a guilt within himself for Mary's situation. Even when he brings up, say for example, his last words did not involve any sort of romantic angles. It did not involve any sort of follow-ups. It's just, "I found your shoes." It's like, okay, and goes off on her Bible. There's no advancements on it. There's
closure.
No closure. His overall avoidances, or just his timidness when it came to their overall started relationship. I can very much see someone making an argument where Cooper could have very much felt like he could have done more with anything that dealt with Mary, but now it's absolutely too late.
Because let's say, for example, you, Professor, told me that you had a dream in which someone you knew who had died was in the dream screaming for help. I would not think, "Oh my God, Professor, you've tapped into the spiritual world and you know the reality of the..." I would immediately think this is more revealing about you, that this is more of a psychological traumatic event that you maybe need to work through and process and try to heal from.
I think that's very much Twin Peaks, and also a form such as this book takes on a spiritual nature that's oftentimes the conflict and personal regrets of an individual, and just slams them into a sandwich, if you will, creating beings such as Laura Palmer inside of the Red Room.
And all this is to say that, again, they're equally compelling, because I do think that if it is actually true, if he's able to, through his dreams, understand that her spirit can't move on, that just goes to further show the tragedy of the world around Cooper, that not only does Marie die at such a young age around the time of being acquainted with Dale, her soul is stuck. And this also has implications for other people in his life who just seem to be stuck in a purgatorial state. Even in the Red Room, seeing what's going on with Caroline, seeing what's going on with Laura, seeing what's going on with Annie, Cooper has a way with women. And it tends to involve their ghosts haunting the eternity of the spirit world. So, that's where, I think it's still compelling, even if it is true.
Yeah.
That there is a sense that she can't move on and he just perceives it. And when you're dealing with a work that has, Mike possessing the one-armed man, there is an element of spirituality. There are giants. There are, things in here that it's maybe it's a dream, maybe it's more than a dream. And it never tells you which way to go. Mm-hmm. And because it's always Dale's perspective, you only get his thoughts, and I don't think he knows what to think of it either. He just often reports the dream and then muses on the nature of evil. Mm-hmm. I don't think he knows what to make of his dreams in this book. Because by the time we get to the series, he trusts his dreams very much.
He does trust his dreams very much. Maybe it is, say, for example, for instances such as this, maybe it could have been something inside the 3-year gap or so on that like becomes more and more formative in his later years. It's chewable.
So that was girl number 1, Marie. The other ones are less in the book. Marie's actually a very big part of the book.
Yeah.
I thought Marie was an interesting character because when you first experience her, at least, for me, when I first saw Marie's name, I did not think, oh, this is going to be a recurring character for the next, 50, 60 pages.
And in fact, like, Marie still continues
Yeah.
on, but in, like, small little doses in which,
She's
like,
a constant element.
Yeah, again, potentially filled with guilt or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, Marie is very formative for Cooper as he's growing up. Moving on and past the overall points of pain in which, actually, there was one more person that could have been potentially formative, but not in the most obvious ways. In fact, like, she kind of comes and goes, and that would be Anne.
Yeah, Anne Sweeney, also known as the Goddess of the Plains.
By the way, can I just check in with you? By the way,
Yeah?
I know your immediate reaction to this. Like, I already know how this is
Am
gonna
I
go.
that predictable?
Probably. But I'm thinking, like, that's a very, that's very close to a name, maybe a little bit of a short name somewhere.
Sweeney Todd. You're thinking of Sweeney Todd.
And I'm thinking to myself, like, Norma Jennings,
Yeah.
Annie Blackburn. What was their original, like, last names before marriage and so on?
Put a pin in every discussion involving that for when we get to something later.
Because as far as I'm concerned, reading this book inside that time frame for whatever, like, I don't know over here.
Yeah.
Like, there's points in which where Anne comes up and I'm just, like, looking at this girl who very much comes and goes in this story. And I'm just thinking to myself, could that?
Doesn't the physical description of her imply like a different physical appearance? Because I thought they said she was blonde.
But that's the
Am
thing.
I
Like,
wrong? Is
Norma
she not
is
blonde?
blonde. Like, who's to say, like, the character either A is not,
I
like,
see what
either
you're
blonde
saying.
or B, hair dye inside
Yeah.
the future. The big part in which I'm going to bring up, we'll talk more about Anne right now, but there's also a mystery girl that ends up appearing that is very important. In the respects of how weird it is to bring it up, where, like, Cooper in college time, boo, 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 goes off to a college dorm with women, boo, 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 and finds a lot of ladies, but ends up kind of getting mixed up with all that alcohol. And there's, like, this lady, if you will, like, he ends up meaning that he actually, like, starts feeling a fondness for. Did she have blonde hair? Did she have red hair? It's hard to say.
I guess.
He later on finds a red-haired person, but having a questionable person who may have red or blonde hair, and with...
But Anne was before this college. Anne was during high school.
Anne was before college. I'm wondering if he ran into Anne at college, and that the use of, like, red and blonde hair, is it either A, to sort of, like, compare between the two? Is it, like, Anne from the past? Or is it, like, either April, who has red hair, or Annie, who has red hair in the future? Because blonde and red are two distinct different colors, Kate Cooper. How do you, like,
I guess
get mixes?
I don't understand. I feel like this is a stretch. Are you suggesting that Anne and April are the same person?
No, I'm not saying Anne
confused.
and April are the same person. I'm saying that they specifically say there's a girl in college that either has blonde or red hair. And then they go into later that, hey, April has red hair. Maybe that was April at the party. But
So we're on Anne right now, right?
we're on Anne right now. Yes, no, but
Why are you talking about April?
I'm saying that. Okay, let me iron this out.
Iron away.
I'm saying that by saying it's blonde or red hair,
Yeah.
and then bringing up a red hair character later, someone could argue that it could have been April.
Okay.
But the thing also is that Annie from the TV show
Yes.
has red hair. Norma, who is her sister, has blonde hair. It could be compelling to argue, potentially, a little bit flirtation, because this is between the blonde-haired and the red-haired woman in the overall girl timeline of Cooper.
I have no clue what you're talking about. I will just say that, yeah, I think it's a stretch to say that Anne Sweeney is actually Annie, which is, I think, what you were starting to say.
I was starting to say that. Again,
All you have is their names are
playing with-
similar.
It's very similar, and she
Okay,
comes
but
and
names
goes.
can just be similar.
It's the red and blonde-haired lady at the college that makes me concerned.
Okay, there's also Andy is going to be one of the girls. Do you want to suggest that Andy is actually the same person as Andy in the show?
You and I both thought it!
What I'm getting at, though, is names can be similar.
And names
David
can be
Lynch does
similar.
this all the time.
He does, and I admit there's more than one Anne and Annie inside of existence.
Yes, there
it's just
are.
the use of colored hair is
I don't
weird.
know. People have hair.
People have hair.
Anyway, I don't have much to say about Anne Sweeney, Goddess of the Plains. he like feels like, oh man, I want to spend the rest of my life with her, but so does everyone else feel that way. It also mentions including a Nancy Nordstrom, 10th grader who had a lot of peace buttons and was goaltender for the field hockey team. I don't really know what they were bringing in with the Nancy part. I guess that's your queer representation potentially, because the idea that Nancy also wanted to be with this person named Anne Sweeney, goddess of the plains, but it doesn't really go very far. Anne Sweeney's kind of a weird little footnote or bump in the road. I do want to note that Dale Cooper claims he blew up Anne's mailbox and felt better afterward after contemplating several different options, including poisoning her, committing arson on her house, and all of these different variations, or committing arson on Nancy's house.
Yeah.
So finally settling on just blowing up Anne's mailbox. That's pretty deviant behavior for Cooper. Also, fire.
It's pretty deviant.
Incendiaries.
It's pretty deviant behavior. Now, you could, like, take that Cooper may fall easily, depending on the person, if you will, for something like a love, especially whenever it comes to this figure that may be Laura Palmer adjacent, in which it seems like there's a lot of attraction from a lot of different people coming into this one character. But the thing that kind of, like, starts my conspiracy brain is whenever I find a piece of information that can be easily omitted.
Yeah.
Blonde, red-haired girl in college. And I can take those out and have structurally still a lot of the same story, if you will, with not much to derive. It gets me it fills me with questions.
One girl who I'm pretty confident is not Annie from the future, past, distant future magician calling between two worlds is a woman named April Larkin. Dale decided to, after leaving his camp, decided to forego the bus ride home and instead travel by himself. In what, at the time, to me at least reading, felt like a rather bold move for this 16-year-old to do.
Yes.
Decided to experience things that he would view as vital to a complete education and to kind of just at this point be reckless in a way that he hadn't been before. So even though Dale Cooper in his language, he's still very precise, he's still very, like, an oddball sticking to authority and the rules and all these sort of things, he still has that teenage rebellion side in him, and it does manifest like in moments like this where he just throws caution to the wind. It's like, I'm not taking your stinking bus, I'm going on my own trip. And that is where he encounters a couple who the book says are in their early 20s, Star and April. And Star being the gentleman, April being the young woman, and from early 20s, the youngest possible age using mathematics is that April is 20. Oldest possible age, would you consider 24 to be early 20s, or is that mid 20s at that point?
I think that's starting to, like, that's when it complicates it.
To be fair, you're also a 16-year-old boy looking at a 24-year-old. I don't know if you would perceive.
Yeah, no, I think that as far as my overall dialogue goes, which may not be accurate, early 20s is 20 to about 23, mid 20s 24 to 26, late 20s is about 27 to 29.
So the age matters, though, because Coop at age 16 becomes rather infatuated with April. And April, for her part, doesn't really squash this. She doesn't fully engage. It does not reach the point of physical intimacy.
But it still seems that April, as far as the character goes, like, is very... She embraces a sexual nature, if you will.
Yeah.
It's something which, like, she doesn't shy away from, like, talking about the pyramid that rests on the top of the overall bust, that overall is supposed to, like, enhance sexual experiences.
Sex magic.
She ends up, like, actively sleeping and having sex behind Dale Cooper as he's driving the car.
Like, has no problem with, sleeping with her boyfriend, lover, Star, with this 16-year-old around.
Yeah. And whether it is, like, perceived, if you will, sexually, or if it's just something of the just characters, like, ways of communicating, but still Cooper very much will take it in a sexual way, is like long kisses, if you will.
She also drives in a van and takes small little white pills and, I don't know, putting these things together, I'm getting some hippie vibes, right? We're getting the stereotypical free love kind of person. So even though she's in this relationship with Star, there's always that sense in which she's so liberated in talking about sexuality that she doesn't seem to perceive any sort of inappropriateness in how she's handling herself around Coop, who she definitely has to notice has a crush on her. I don't think Dale could hide that very well. That's my reading. We don't know her perspective fully, but I feel like she knew.
Yeah, even like Cooper is just sort of like trying to admit that his overall virginity to, or as if almost like expressing like his own desires, but antics ensue. Matter he ends up hurting his foot. He ends up getting intoxicated on some brandy that was nearby, to the point that she more so just tries to support him, if you will, inside of her nude, potentially drug-induced state.
Yeah, she does kiss him, right, in the story?
She does kiss him multiple times. It's noted that she kisses him at sometimes long and hard, if you will. But again, I don't know whether or not that is an expression fully sexual or if it is, again...
almost like a big sister motherly kind of thing.
It still seems on the lips, but yeah,
no,
I don't know what is communicated from her, because she isn't someone who does sexual advances onto him.
No. She more like, I don't even know. I wouldn't say she's toying with it. She seems to be aware of how Dale feels, and if anything, is just trying to like help the kid figure himself out more.
Yeah, she parts him with an overall pyramid of his own so that he can explore his own sexuality.
But I don't think she's interested in him back, because I think she does view him as this young 16-year-old kid. So it's in a really strange, like, uncomfortable zone where it's not predatory, but it's also like, you're at best case scenario, she's 20. And he's 16, but like that's not good. You shouldn't do that.
It's still being impactful in a way that
it's not
creates a very bad power dynamic.
Things get even weirder when later Dale is back home and April reappears as his English teacher's new student teacher, Miss Larkin.
Yeah.
So not only does he have this weird history, but now you've got the element that she is the student teacher. She is actively grading his work, and Dale in the back of his mind is like, is there still a chance for us?
Yeah.
And then she's meanwhile giving him a D in class.
She's giving him a D in class. When she sees a poem that I'm sure that she's aware enough that is about like the point that they had known each other.
Yeah.
She says maybe poetry is not for you. And just like almost like is trying to gesture away from it at points. And even when she like it shows like, she invites Cooper over because Cooper believes that he can talk to concerns with her and so on. It's not something in which it seems like she's trying to lead him in on something. No, actively there's another teacher there at her apartment and so on that seems to be more romantically interested.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you got the same vibe from that than I did.
Yeah, no, it just seems like he came around to overall discuss something and just work something out. And that's when the... American history, I believe, teacher, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and they're both adults, but also, like, you shouldn't be doing that as a student teacher.
The closest thing that I can say that could be potentially the point, that could potentially be, like, a pushing angle from him, I think it's just, like, misread messages from Cooper from her when she's being a teacher and reading off an overall poem, if you will. I think that her emphasizing this poem is just showing, again, her... There's still a sense of liberation from her own sense and not really believing in the same sort of like status quo cues, but also he's just probably thinking like, she just keeps looking at me. I think that's just like a teenage fixation.
It's just interesting also how April is sort of an echo of Marie in the sense that you've got this not spiritual necessarily, but definitely like hippie side of character combined with the spirituality of like the pyramid, but also the poetry. Marie had that poet friend.
Yes.
And this is literally someone grading his poetry. So it's a sort of like, this is an echo, but she's an older woman, more experienced in these things that he wants to try to be involved with. And she's not full-blown Lana Milford territory, but she does appear to like have a power over the men in her life. The fact that she just starts being the student teacher and all of a sudden she's entangled this other teacher involved, it's just like, Dale, you might want to get away. Like this might not be a good environment for you as a like minor. Please do not do this. Then we move on to girl number 3, Andy. I know what you're thinking. And yes, it's very funny, isn't it? Andy. Like this is where, Anne and Annie, I know the names sound familiar, Professor. Andy sounds a lot like Andy. You ever notice that?
Yeah.
Maybe the person who ended up hitting him on the head with a field hockey ball was actually Andy Brennan.
Yep, this red-haired woman who
goes to a girls' school.
Goes to an all-girls school. Yep, could probably be Andy. I think that they're...
Also, I did not know what field hockey was until I read this book.
Yeah.
Did you know what that is?
Yeah.
I never heard of it because it was like hockey ball. I'm like, use pucks in hockey. Even I know that. And then I Google it and I'm like, oh, okay, apparently there's a whole sport I didn't know about.
What are you talking about, Scott Frost?
I don't know a thing about sports, and even I know they use pucks.
No, it is something in which, similar to beforehand, like there is a name that can be commonly used, if you will, and this one is one that has been used to represent both genders, if you will.
It's very funny to use the name Andy.
It's very...
You're writing to a Twin Peaks audience.
There is a humor to it, especially since this is probably the most explicit one. Like, the first reaction that we get is like them meeting, if you will, and them having a conversation. And then as they're going off to this overall engagement that's involved in their school, they go off into the distance, and the sex is explicitly described to the point that it's compared to the swimming of dolphins for the insertion of the penis.
I just want to clarify then that if anyone is on the fence about reading My Life, My Tapes, this is a book in which Dale Cooper has sex with Andy. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to sell you on that premise.
It's a sexy book. It really is.
Also, noticeably, of course, not important at all. I just want to mention it randomly. This is happening around a bonfire.
Yeah.
That the time where he has sex is around fire. She's talking about her father being a fireman. This is completely incidental, not important. I just felt like mentioning
even when
it.
he looked at it and was a little bit nervous about it because, again, fire being like the one less experience and him just worrying that he's cursed and so on. Don't worry, they go a little bit away from it and just have sex.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine. Andy's kind of a little bit of a comical element in the story because, while she does have the most physical intimacy with Dale, she's definitely not the strongest emotional connection. Afterward, Andy informs Dale, like the next day, I think, right? Yeah. That this very morning, she's heading off for a 6-month trip to Holland. Don't follow me because I'm going to go meet my husband at the airport. And Dale's like, I don't understand the world. Nothing makes sense. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. That's all I know about.
Yeah.
Life is a mystery.
She overall has a husband, and there is a point where she will return inside this story to engage with Cooper, but it is very much a physical relationship. Though Cooper may himself grow attached with certain emotions, she very much makes it clear that this exchange, it's not going to proceed with love, if you will. But still, it seems that he grows to understand the human body a bit more, especially after Chinese food. There's even a tally mark system, wink wink.
Well, she gives him the Kama Sutra.
The Kama Sutra,
a book.
yes.
It says a book on the Kama Sutra, which I don't really know. I guess it is the Kama Sutra. Anyway, gives him a book, and they do
Kama
several...
Sutra adjacent.
Yeah, they do several experiments.
A lot
of experiments.
Yep, and they end up tying for the night.
Yeah, and it's interesting, because, again, it's the conflation of sexuality with magic, mysticism, and spirituality.
Yeah.
And also he's doing it as an experiment, the same way that he tests his body not getting enough sleep, or he tests his body with the effects of different substances. Here it's sex.
And sometimes just not peeing.
Yeah, not peeing.
Yeah, but this is sex, yes.
Yeah, so that's all going on. Eventually she does leave, though, because her husband in Holland's been injured. She needs to go back. And then she tells Dale that love was not a variable in their relationship.
She still hopes that he will find it. It seems that it's not something in which, like, she's just, like, waving him off goodbye. It seems like there's enough care, but not a love.
She's not in love with him. And, like, you could try to read into it, and that maybe she and her husband haven't worked out, that maybe they see other people when they're away on trips, and maybe it's just not a romantic thing, it's just a sexual thing, so it's fine. I just find it unlikely because the book does not get into that specifics. It was published in the 90s, about the 70s, and it's possible. I just don't think that's what's set up. I think she's just cheating on her husband.
Yeah, I think the airport scene is the important indicator there.
But I like the way she just casually, like, don't worry, I never loved you anyway. Bye, and then just, like, leaves. And Dale does not seem to understand that message until she's very blunt with it.
Not just understand the message, but it seems that he's still at least bitter for a little while after that, because he goes on to say that he basically hopes that her husband drowns.
Yeah. There's still more girls, by the way. We're not done with this list. Next is Lena and Joan. I grouped them together because Lena is the one that's about his age, and then Joan is the mom. And they're both involved in a little subplot that, again, feels kind of like a bump in the road. Lena is interesting to Dale because she knows more about coffee than anyone Dale's ever met before.
Yeah.
And but she's made a vow of celibacy. that connects back to a situation where she took one of her boyfriends over to meet her mom, and the mom slept with her boyfriend. So she's like, well, I'm going to hold off on things. Let's be careful. And then eventually she does bring Dale over to meet her mom.
Which
and
apparently Dale describes like the mom being like absolutely freaking amazing.
just the most beautiful, smart, intelligent person ever, super charming. And it seems like Joan, the mother, is about to make moves on Dale, but then completely incidental. Nothing at all. This doesn't matter. A fire breaks out in the garage. Weird how that happens. And
Yeah.
this fire breaks in the garage, and he finds out later that his girlfriend, the daughter, was the arsonist.
Yeah.
And it gets in this whole shindig.
He did at the very least say that a moment was getting close with potentially the mother, that if it wasn't for that fire, things may have escalated too quickly, which either it says something in which like his perception of it could say that's something on towards the mother. It could say what he may have done himself, just because who knows? Like it seemed like the mother was pacing until she came to a decision before unlocking the door. Maybe she was going to talk about the situation. Maybe she was going to be involved with the situation again. That's a curious thing. But regardless,
I assume the situation
fire!
again. And then they end up
happens.
Lena, the daughter, and Cooper end up having sex in the car, which accidentally gets reversed into a herd of cows.
Yep, they have sex there, and there's some interesting things that happen, wouldn't you say?
Which part?
The fact that after the arson, creating a fire, it seems that Lena, at the very least from what we've experienced up till then, has a little bit of a personality shift, if you will, of, again, making arson inside the garage, and then in the middle of the road with a smell of gasoline in the air, desiring and craving sexy stuff, if you will. And yeah, that's
sure
wild.
Whatever it is, she's
That's
getting help
wild.
for it because they bring her into a hospital for psychiatric evaluation. I'm sure this is a good thing for her. And then when she's released, she thinks that Dale is her brother Todd. So you've got another woman that Dale is involved in who ends up being sent for psychiatric evaluation and help, getting confused about identities, fire.
She does get better in the future in which she does recognize him as Cooper, to the point that she sends a letter saying that she's happily married and so on. So there is an aftermath that happens, but it's like saying something like that, especially after everything that had happened while he was around, does not likely help Cooper's perspective that he is truly cursed.
Yeah. So the next one, he doesn't really try anything too much with. Kind of understands there's boundaries between them. But that is Agent Robin, who he was briefly involved with during his time learning to be an FBI agent. Agent Robin and Dale Cooper both were interested in each other, both attracted to each other, but did not get involved due to their present circumstances, ended up parting with a kiss when they were assigned away. The one thing I want to note about Agent Robin, though, is that there was a simulation where Dale Cooper was assigned Robin as a partner.
Yeah.
And during the simulation, because he had feelings for Agent Robin, or at least that's the way he retroactively justified what happened. He blames the fact that he had feelings. During the simulation, she died, right? Quote unquote died. Like, if this was real, his partner would have been dead because he let his own feelings get in the way. And he's basically vowing at this point, never again. Never going to let my feelings be a personal weakness that's going to get a young woman hurt. Not doing that again.
He basically compares like losing a partner to being one of the worst things you can do as an agent,
Yes.
if you will. So
that, again, I could be farcical and say it doesn't matter, or I could just say Caroline, or I could just say Audrey, or I could just say Annie, or I could just say Dale Cooper, please stop. Please stop, Dale Cooper. Please.
He does actually meet up with Robin inside the future, in which they are able to reconnect, but there's nothing romantic that comes out of it. It seems like Cooper wants to leave that, at least, inside the past.
Yeah.
Which either, if you want to read it in a humorous way, in which his inability to leave things into the past, but because they keep resurfacing again and again in habits, or if you want to read it as how much he's able to actually distance himself and keep things professional in his overall workplace lens. There's some fun things to chew on for Robin.
Also, through FBI maneuvers and endeavors, Dale Cooper meets Diane.
Diane?
What are the most startling things about this
Diane,
book?
which could be a potential last name to Diane?
One of the most startling things about this book is that it does confirm, if you consider this book canon, that Diane is a real speaking person. Now, most of the tapes that Dale records, he admits, are just to himself. He finds it comforting to imagine he's talking to Diane, but he kind of knows it's really just to himself for most of these tapes. This is interesting because it does go so far as to say, yep, Diane's a real person. He describes Diane as an interesting cross between a saint and a cabaret singer. Unfortunately, we only get told that. I don't think we get any evidence of either the sainthood or the cabaret singer
Again,
nature.
it seems that she is like that, if you
She
will.
is
I
like
don't
those
think
two
that
things.
she is a saintly cabaret singer.
That'd be a great combination. Hire her for the FBI. And there was a moment where he asked Diane out for dinner, and he says, if this in any way crosses over a line that we have long ago set for our relationship, I will understand. If not, how does 8 o'clock sound?
And this is where we get the first words ever from Diane, because Diane is one of the people interviewed, as many people are.
At the beginning of a chapter.
At the beginning of a chapter. The way that she overall is introduced inside the beginning of this chapter is arguably very sensual, especially in the context of talking about like the skin and the rising of Chinese food, which in a prior chapter dealing with April.
Do you want to read this part or do you want me to? Because I feel like one of us has got to read this.
If you would like to.
Okay, so here's the deal. I want to preface this all. I am vegetarian. I find this to be incredibly disgusting on a personal level. So I'm reading this not because I enjoy reading this, but because I feel I owe it to you, the listener. Please clap.
Just read. No.
You're not going to do the applause sound effect?
We're reading it. No one applauses at the beginning of a performance.
Can you applause at the end?
We'll see how well it goes.
Cool. Special Agent Cooper, Dale, and I had dinner once. We ate Chinese. We had wonton soup, egg rolls, and Peking duck. That's the one where they inflate the bird with air, swelling it to over double its original size. Without a doubt, the most delicious skin I've ever eaten. Firm and at the same time, delicate. And the meat itself takes on a flavor when slid into the mouth. Well, I couldn't get enough of it.
Not hampering against your performance, but I think that deserves more of an ooh situation, more than like a whole audience sitting at the background being like, yeah!
See, in my mind, I did not read this sexually at all, actually. I read this with abject horror, because I was reading it being like, that's the one where it's the most delicious skin.
No. I'm thinking delicious skin. I'm thinking about the sexual content.
I get Hannibal vibes out of this.
Beforehand. Apparently, Chinese food enhances sex in Dale Cooper's eye, so having a situation where they both go out for Chinese food and potentially like it gets very sensual, I don't put it out of the possibility.
No, I think what you're saying makes sense, and once you said it could be interpreted sexually, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. It's really ambiguous what you're supposed to get out of this section, because most of the chapter beginnings, someone talks about Dale Cooper's personality or his attitude or like something that advances the story.
Yeah.
She spends most of this talking about the Peking duck, and that is the most personality we ever get out of Diane in this book. So it seems random if you don't interpret it to be about something else. If it is just her describing how good the duck was, what a weird character quirk. Diane's just really into the Peking duck. But yeah, if you take it sexually, it's possible. It's just Dale Cooper never confirms it.
Yeah, no.
He never says it in any other way.
He does not say it in any other way, whether you are going to lean in onto that little cabaret singer style in which like it's very theatrical in the overall description, and that's just a bit of engagement. If it's sexual, I leave it up to you. I'm leaning onto the sexual nature just because, again, context.
I'm leaning into
Chinese
the I
food.
feel gross reading it nature.
Some people feel that way about that sort of stuff.
Meat. That's the way I feel about it.
Yeah, there was a lot of meat that night, if you know what I'm saying. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
I also want to say controversial hot take that's going to get me in trouble with everyone.
Yeah.
I don't like Diane being like confirmed to be a real person in this book. So I've said it before during Fire Walk with Me when we talked about the missing pieces, where there's a clip of Dale Cooper talking to an not visible person, potentially maybe in a room. Yeah. That was already kind of pushing the idea that Diane's real, but at least it never confirmed it. At least in the Fire Walk with Me, Missing Pieces, it never outright showed Diane. But I've always thought, watching the original series, that having Diane just being an unclear entity in Cooper's life, either a real person who is getting these tapes, a real person who is not getting these tapes, or an imaginary fictitious person that helps with his brain organize thoughts when he's talking. I find the idea of Diane being ambiguous to be far more interesting than she's his real secretary, and then we get these really bland, generic ideas of like, she's like a saint, but also a cabaret singer, and then we don't get anything other than the Peking duck part. She's just like, for the big reveal of it being Diane, there is nothing that makes it really interesting to me. I'm just like, wow, one less mystery, thanks.
I think that, but that's the thing, like, I don't think it's one less mystery. I think that, for one, as far as I'm concerned, like, Diane's, like, overall general personality, this is a singular perspective. I think that, sure, like, him speaking into a tape and, like, speaking of Diane, they're, like, I recognize your reading. I enjoy your reading. But there's still, like, so much left into the dark that, for the most part, other than a fondness for Chinese food and metaphors, there's nothing I can really confirm beyond that. And I almost, like, find a humor that that's the only thing we're going to get from Diane.
I just, when I'm watching the show and he's talking to Diane in the tapes, I don't like to know a real person he's talking to. I like it when I don't have a clue who he's talking to, if it's even a real person.
I find it in the similar light myself whenever it comes to, like, later reveals, or, like, whenever something pops up. Like, say, for example, Sam Stanley. When early on in the series, there's Sam Stanley mentioned there, and when we get a Sam Stanley in the movie, I think that's personally exciting for me.
I think that's a different category, though, because Diane was always in doubt of whether she's real or not based on the series. I mean, fans speculated about that a lot, at the time.
And I find that very curious because, like, as far as FBI agents go, I find that to be a very strange and distinctive quirk to state out a name such as Diane, if you will.
For more information on this particular quandary, please see the video game Deadly Premonition. You still don't know, but I do.
I know.
And I actually am not joking that there is a follow-up to this element with Diane in Deadly Premonition that's quite an interesting take.
Oh yeah, no, I think that there's all sorts of interesting takes. Again, I think that like the take on speaking more about Diane in this way is very fascinating, if you will. It's just that something that honestly just never really crossed my mind. It was like the concept of the mystery of, like, Wilson's face in Home Improvement Beyond the Fence.
Well, I assumed he had a lower jaw. Yeah, I didn't assume he was.
But you never saw it, did you?
But with all of Dale Cooper's weird mannerisms, I don't think it was that far-fetched to think that he might not be talking to a real person. Mm-hmm. You don't know. You always have that sense in the back of your mind, or could have that sense in the back of your mind, that you don't know. Well, now you do. And I guess for me, I know I've belabored this point a lot. I'm aware that people may not agree with me on this point, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But I just don't find that the book's interpretation of Diane adds anything to the series when I watch it.
Yeah.
Whereas I find other parts of the book, like the Wyndham Earle parts, or parts with Cooper's family, they do add things.
I think that the only thing that Diane does is inadvertently add to Cooper's character for the sake of just addressing Diane is something of a comfort. He says Diane inside it, and it feels like he can feel that support about.
It shows his insecurities almost. It shows the sense of weakness that he relies on having the illusion of this other person there to give him guidance during these moments of potential doubt. It's a fragility. I'm curious, thinking of all these different characters. I mean, the main female character we haven't talked about would be Cooper's mother. Mm-hmm. But outside of the mother, of the characters that have had an influence, and then also Caroline we haven't talked about too, but she's with Wyndham, we'll get to that. Outside of Caroline and Cooper's mom, which female characters do you think are well written in the book? Are they all strong? Do you like them? Are they good female characters? Like, what are your thoughts?
I think that for the most part, a lot of them are very nice characters. I think that they not only fulfill a overall moment of growth when it comes to Cooper's life, but I look at individuals such as Lena adding to a just general mystery and strangeness to the overall story as is. Open up April for and Dandy for the complications that comes with any sort of relation, whether it is something of a sexual nature or not. I think that us having these extended conversations, especially diving deeper into people such as Robin and Caroline, is very engaging, if you will, despite the fact that we don't get much from them. I think that there's still enough information for them that expands well enough that the phrase "my life, my tapes" is emphasized in a positive light, but at the same time, I don't see anyone being a larger stereotype out of these characters. I think that the most compelling, though, is probably Mary.
Yeah.
So,
whatever name you want to call her.
exactly.
I agree with you on Marie being the most interesting and most developed character here of the female characters so far, because I feel like the majority of them otherwise are very flat and not very much substance, and they're mostly plot devices there to develop Dale Cooper's character. And I think they're effective at developing Dale Cooper's character, whether that's the interpretation of Dale you like or not. I think they're effective at contributing to this idea of what Dale Cooper's mind is like and how he's like in these relationships. But I can't imagine anyone, after reading this book, saying, oh man, my new favorite Twin Peaks character is definitely Lena. Like, I just can't see it because there's just not enough there. They're not people.
I don't think that they're developed enough to be, say, for example, large characters that might garner those sort of fan bases, but I still think that they're presented enough in which they are a, though fleeting portion of Cooper's life. I'm still convinced enough that they have lives and realities that we may never know, because this is not about them. This is, again, Cooper's life
and I don't think it's a gendered issue either, because there's very few male characters introduced in this book actually at all.
I think that
he has very few male connections.
I think that there's not much change other than physical that really happens to his father, which is the most mentioned character throughout it. But I still think that I can probably get more details and just like personality out of some of these characters that I see for a few pages, as opposed towards, say, for example, Cooper's father. Or like Cooper's friend.
I actually liked Cooper's father quite a bit in the book.
I like Cooper's father quite a bit. I still think that he's more so, the world affects him more than he affects the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, the way Dale words it is that his father is a free thinker. The dad is pretty formative for Cooper in his development. It's the main family figure throughout the majority of his life. And I thought he's an interesting character. I don't know if he stands out strong enough that I would say, like, oh, one of my favorite Twin Peaks characters is Dale Cooper's like unnamed father. I don't think he ever gets a name in this entire book. Dad Cooper. But he's still interesting within his own right, and pretty substantial for Cooper, even in like unstated ways. I think he was more influential than maybe even Cooper's aware of in his own life. In terms of religious background, Dale Cooper's father has Dale going to a Quaker-run school, and his rationale for that isn't because they are Quakers or even necessarily Christian. Again, he's more of like an agnostic-y, free thinker type character from what I get. But he does say that if they were to be religious, he says that they'd be right up there with the Quakers or the Unitarians because of the way that he views them using their brains and using their minds. So the little bit I know about Quakers and Unitarians, Quakers are very spontaneous in their religious worship. They are more about the idea that anyone in the congregation can speak up and be moved by the Spirit. Yeah. Not necessarily living a hierarchy of like a minister, right? And politically speaking, the Quakers have oftentimes been very liberal or to the left. They've been usually one of the most active in terms of human freedoms and human rights out of other different Christian denominations. So it makes sense politically given the father's leanings. And then Unitarians are also kind of in that same boat too. So Christian Unitarians would typically believe in the idea that, there is no hell per se, or that people are able to be saved from that the salvation of Christ extends to everyone. So as a result of that kind of fundamental belief, Unitarians typically are seen as more open and less judgmental, if you want to take a positive spin of that. A negative spin might be that they are not really believing the same scripture of the Bible. They're kind of misinterpreting it if you're against their ideology. But, I look at Unitarians and Quakers and thinking, okay, well, if that's where the father views himself and kind of views what he's instilling in his child, it's a sort of open-mindedness, a sort of looseness, a sort of sense of equality and community being as the focus more than necessarily a dogma or orthodoxy. Neither one of these groups is very dogmatic or orthodoxy related. So yeah, interesting that they go to a Quaker-run school. And in terms of these free thinker behaviors, a lot of it leans into politics. There are some behaviors that are rather just strange that the dad will just suddenly engage in almost out of impulse, it feels like. For 1 year during Thanksgiving, he just meets a random American Indian on a bus and invites him over for dinner.
Yeah.
And just has him over to talk about things.
Yeah, on Thanksgiving.
Which, I mean, I get it thematically. It's also just kind of weird. Like, imagine being the Native American person on the bus and some random white guy's like, hey, it's Thanksgiving. I'll have you over. I don't know if I'd be offended or honored. I'd be just like, thanks?
I don't think it was like an RPG context in which he just walks up and it's yes or no dialogue box. But I do think that there was probably like a conversation that happened. I've had like friends of I had friends who've had similar family members in which like once they get to know people, they're like, hey, you know what? Just come around here. Just let's have a good time. You seem pretty good.
But it seems pretty specific in the idea that he's an American Indian, and that's why he's inviting him over. So it's like racially motivated. It's strange.
That he is that, and he does invite him over. I don't know if that is why. Like, I don't know if
Otherwise,
he went out of his way to seek out this.
But that's what I mean, though. Is otherwise, I don't think the race of the person would matter for the context.
Race of the person doesn't matters for the context only of what the result was. What happens to go from point A to point B still remains unknown enough because all we know is that dad encounters this person and invites him over for this meal, which is very racially involved.
Yeah. And I don't think in bad intentions. I just think it could definitely be viewed in a strange way.
Yeah.
I think it could be interpreted. I don't know if Dale's father realizes the implications of his actions sometimes. Another one is that he goes off to Mount Rushmore at one point before Dale goes off to college, and Dale's father is threatened by the crowd because he starts wielding is the term I'm looking for, a protest sign that says "Give it back to the Sioux." And Dale eventually talks him down, and they compromise, and Dale lets his father just help him cut a stop sign in half, just to kind of make peace, like, all right, you're going to get punched if we wave this sign right now. Let's just quietly move on. Hey, maybe I'll let you cut a stop sign in half later, make you feel better, okay? Get some ice cream on the way home.
died.
Yeah, they just commit random acts of vandalism for a vague political purpose. And again, there's sort of that political motivation of the dad starts selling in prison Nixon posters. I don't think it's necessarily for the profit. I think he sees a way he can inject the politics into his business. He runs a print shop, by the way.
Yes.
And when he hears about the moon landing, he's convinced that like he needs to start selling maps of the moon. And he just goes full on into moon map territory.
The moon becomes very oddly important, at the very least for his life, because not only is he like making all these little moon maps, not only is he like selling these, he's selling them at a time in which like the moon is like very big and hype because of the moon landing, and then later on after the moon hype has died down but then popped up thanks to National Geographic just sort of like buying them off. The moon still remains important to the dad's life in the respects that when he's flirting with someone, he's like, hey, by the way, there's a crater named after me. And also what I assume, being someone who's made maps, that there's also a little crater that seems to have Cooper's name, which I can believe enough that potentially his father named after Cooper, if you will. This little like Cooper's crater. Cooper's crater. That's weirdly like on the edge of the dark side of the moon.
Yeah, the way it's worded is it's called Cooper's crater, and you can just see it on the edge of the dark side's shadow.
Duh.
It's not ominous at all.
Don't worry about it.
It's fine.
The only way it could be less ominous is if it went on fire or something.
That's about it at this point. Yeah, an owl is on fire on the moon, stomping on cherry pies, and yeah, it's pretty ominous. The dad does not seem to be himself an harbinger of negativity.
Yeah.
I will just mention while the moon is being brought up, one of the articles I was reading on the 25 Years Later website was talking about the theory of Dale Cooper being what's called the moon child, and this gets into a whole other like thing that involves spoilers for things that we're not going to talk about, but there's a whole thing with Moonchild, so you can take things and run with them is all I'm saying.
Freaking
exciting. This book gives you ammunition. It gives you Twin Peaks ammunition.
It gives us Twin Peaks
fire
ammunition.
at whatever target you want, Cooper related, and that's interesting, I suppose. One of the most, I would say, important elements of Dale's father, though, is his experiences from war. And it's World War II, to be specific. And I'm just going to share kind of an extended quote here. He tells Dale a story that happened during the war that's pretty important later. He says, quote, well, this is Dale describing the story of his father told him. He and some other soldiers were in a village in France. The townspeople all told them that a farmer was a collaborator and would tell the Germans that they were in the village. So the soldiers went to the farmhouse and found the man, his wife, and 2 daughters. The farmer gave them some wine and cheese, then took them to see his barn, and one of the soldiers shot and killed him. Dad then told me that he was very proud of me, but that I must be sure to make up my own mind about things in the world. I'm not sure what he means, but he said someday I would understand. I asked him to tell me more about what he saw in the war, but he just looked out the window at the train at the lights passing by and didn't say a word all the way home.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this story introduced while I was on the train talking to his son. It randomly kind of gets into this really serious topic of going into this village and being warned by these German townspeople that this farmer was a collaborator. He's going to tell on you. He's going to reveal your location, get you killed. You've got to stop him first. And this reminds me, there's this philosophy book I remember reading when I was in high school called Justice. It's by Michael Sandel. And it goes through a bunch of different beginner level, philosophy topics and moral dilemmas. And one of them brought up in there is the situation, I believe it's with Marcus Luttrell, and it's this Afghan goat herd situation that's brought up in the book, where they have intel of a terrorist cell. They're going to go and try to do something about it. But along the way, they meet these goat herds, and they have no way of knowing for sure whether the goat herds are going to reveal the location to the terrorists or whether they're just innocent bystanders or innocent bystanders who could be tortured into telling their location and faced with that moral dilemma. And Luttrell, as kind of the leader of the mission, he decides not to kill the goat herds because to him, they're innocent people. He has no way of knowing for sure that they're actually going to tell, and he's kind of presuming their innocence. They move on. The terrorist cell finds out. He loses many of his own men. And later on, when he's writing about it, he regrets not killing the Afghan goat herds. He says he made a mistake, and it was a foolish mistake. People paid with their lives for not killing those goat herds. I bring this expanded story in to say, I have not been in conflict and war, neither of you, Professor. No. I have no clue at all the emotions that would go through a person's mind if they were in charge of this decision. But obviously it haunted his father for years and years and years later that they killed this farmer. Mm-hmm. And that this farmer had a family. The farmer had given them food and drinks, and kind of behind his back, one of the other soldiers shot and killed him. Mm-hmm. We find out later that the farmer that they had killed was not a collaborator. Yeah. That the father had learned that in this specific situation, he had been for all we know, innocent bystander.
Yes.
And the villagers had told him that this farmer was like this because they owed the farmer money. That they just wanted this man dead and used the military men to get his job done. And this is when the father tells Dale, again, a little older at this point, quote, "We all fail, and that we would again and again, and that was just the way it was." So the takeaway that Dale's father has, at least, is that mistakes are inevitable. Those consequences are inevitable, and it's just going to keep happening. Mm-hmm. This seems crucially important to me for Dale's character, because Dale is a character that continuously fails again and again and again, and lives are hurt in the crossfire of his actions. And even though Dale does not go off to war, I do feel like the sins of his father and sort of the guilt that his father carries have echoes in Dale Cooper's own life. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on the father's war story and kind of its implications for Cooper? Are you with me? Are you disagreeing with me? Where are you?
No, I don't disagree with you. I think that overall, it's a large reflection in which I think in both ways himself and his father might understand an idea of recognizing a fault, recognizing a failure. It's just how they live with it afterwards, if you will, is a very haunting sense. It's something which that it never really goes away one way or another. And even though, despite the fact that his father just tries to instill this knowledge onto Cooper, it's either A, too late for Cooper, in which the way that he overall perceives his own faults, or it's just something in which he falls into the same realm as his father, that pushes an idea of an irreversible item inside of your life you can try to run away from, but it still sort of like persists and exists for you. It's a phantom.
It's the Thanos.
Yeah.
Dread from it. Dread it, run from it. However the quote works from Thanos. That.
Sure.
Copy and paste that.
Copy and paste the Thanos quote in your heads. Everyone knows it. It's a household name.
Yeah.
There's still more content that ends up with the father, mind you. It's just, again, more interesting happenstance, if you will. He ends up losing his house, if you will, due to money that is owed, if you will. Business is just hard at times, to the point that he just takes up an apartment right above his own shop.
Yeah,
so
when given the choice,
there.
he'd rather sell his home than sell his shop, so he just rooted himself in his shop.
So making that little bit of permanence, which is pretty sad for a character, but at the same time, if you just keep the house and you lose your place of income, I can see where the choice was finalized there. Eventually ends up going on a trip with Dale as he's like going off to explore San Francisco and so on. But for some reason, just sort of like falls into love and marriage with just someone that he sort of like meets and has a shotgun wedding with, and they actually seem to be happy for the rest of their lives and so on. But to the point that he just kind of like gets like, he's just sort of left behind from Cooper being like, yeah, you know what, Dad, you go do you.
Yeah.
His dad is still important with him because he's the only element that sort of like gets peppered in from time to time when we lack tapes, if you will, as Dale sends letters to his father. It seems that there is an area of closeness in that familiar realm that Cooper has, but still that's kind of like suddenly the divide that suddenly happens between him and his father. That's when sort of like I would say that their relationship just isn't as close, if you will, mainly because they're off doing different things.
I also think it lends some potential context for Cooper's actions later in Twin Peaks, where once his father talks about leaving the area that they grew up in together, Cooper basically resolves the idea that he has no reason to ever come back. Like, he doesn't really want to come back to his hometown anymore. So when he starts, during the show, wanting to buy land in Twin Peaks, I think it lends itself a bit more context that he doesn't have a home anymore. Like, he obviously goes back and forth to Philadelphia for the FBI office, but he doesn't have a stable sense of place.
Yeah.
And he looks at Twin Peaks as a new home, a new family, a new place to root himself. This is one area where, again, I think that the book very subtly allows you to reinterpret the show in, I think, rather interesting ways. The father has a more consistent presence in Dale's life because he's obviously by the end still alive and still around, and maybe not as close, but he's still someone that Dale can contact. Whereas Dale's mother passes away early into the novel, and her presence is much more of a lingering sort of memory, and again, another tragic figure in his life that kind of haunts him in its own way. So the mother of Dale Cooper is more strict than the father. Generally, she seems more on the nose and more strict about things, but also very supportive at the same time.
Yes, she's someone who, say for example, when Cooper disappears because he decides to walk home without really telling anyone, she is someone who just recognizes his overall path, recognizes what he's done, but no, you're grounded. Like,
she gives him this great food, and then it's like, you're grounded.
No, you do not do that, or otherwise I will personally kill you myself.
Yeah, like she like borderline threatens him. The dad's response is more like, "Oh, did you find anything interesting? Okay, cool. Yeah, you're grounded." But like more casual about it. He's not like, I'm going to beat you within an inch of your life, you know?
Yeah.
He's more casual about it. But in reality, she seems very supportive. And we know that Dale, at least as a kid, had asthma attacks, pretty severe asthma attacks. And she would try to help him through that, through his childhood.
Yes.
The main thing that sticks out is his mother is a dreamer. She has a lot of vivid dreams.
Which you can... I would say makes things interesting. I'm sure that you and I thought of like a certain mother that also could be potentially compared.
Right, Sarah Palmer. Quote, "Mom told me another one of her dreams that she has been having. She said that she was alone on a field when thousands of birds filled the sky, blocking out all the light. That's when she always wakes up. Mom says we can see things in our dreams that we can't see when we're awake. I asked her what she thought the dream meant, but she just smiled and said it was nothing." I don't believe that she thought it was nothing based on everything that was just said there. But birds, I don't know if they're specifically owls, but there are birds.
Honestly, like, kind of like considering right now, a theme that I'm kind of gathering, and please tell me where I'm getting contradicted here, but the more that I sort of think about it, the more, like, mysterious or mystical mothers can be inside of Twin Peaks. Like,
Nope, there's something to that.
Where, like, say, for example, even, like, down to Donna's mother, like, having layers and layers upon mystery, if you will. People questioning, like, whether or not, like, how the wheelchair even operates for her, how Sarah Palmer is, how Cooper's mother, in this context, is. I'm trying to think of a normal mom. And even, like reading Revelations as one is knitting with Bobby's parents.
Yeah.
There seems to be a very interesting...
Parents in general are a very specific element in how they shape their children in Twin Peaks. The impact even of Garland Briggs as a father, the impact of, James's parenthood, where his mother is unavailable to him and instead he is being raised by Big Ed and Nadine and the influence they have upon James. There's a lot you could say about the parents in general, but specifically Cooper's mother has a lot of parallels with Sarah Palmer, and it seems very much intentional. I have a hard time believing it's not. Which further parallels Cooper with Laura. This book implies more of a connection to sexuality that connects him to Laura. He doesn't have nearly as much of a drug influence as Laura did, but there was some dabbling. He borders on alcoholism at certain points in the book where he turns to alcohol for emotional support. He never goes quite full in, but it almost makes you think, at least makes me think, I should say, that it wasn't that far off. That Dale could have gone down a road of addiction if things had turned out differently. He just had more structure and support than Laura ever did. And he didn't have something like Bob in his life. Dale Cooper was around suffering and tragedy and loss, but it never appeared that he had a looming figure the way that Laura had.
Well, there are, like, points in dreams and as well as darknesses that are referenced throughout the book,
but
that
they're
could be argued. They're distant. They are
They're
distant.
closing in, but they are not in your own home.
Yes.
It's not in his house now, to put it in the giant's words. Is that the giant who said that?
I can't remember from this giant. It's someone said
Actually, it might be a thing you don't know yet, so don't worry about that. I never said anything. I never said anything about anything.
You never said anything about anything.
Who listens to me? Anyway, yeah, you're right, though. There is definitely a figure that seems very Bob-like in the mother's dreams and then later in Cooper's dreams.
Yes.
Quote, had a dream in the middle of the night that frightened me a great deal. A man who I had never seen was trying to break into my room. He kept calling my name and said that he wanted me. He then screamed, and after a moment it turned into a kind of roar, as if he were some kind of animal. I told Mom about it, and she said that she knew about him, and that she had the same dream, and that I must never let the man into my room. I don't understand what it means. If this isn't Bob, I'd be stunned. Like, if this isn't meant to be, and even author's intentions, be damned here. It's Bob, right? Like that just is so clearly either directly Bob or something adjacent to it. But this is a case where Dale hears the creature, the roaring type laughing, the sounds, the man, knows that the presence there, but there is a sense of safety. It is not in his room. It is not there. Laura could not escape that.
Yeah, it's something in which this looming presence, if you will, whether you see it as overall Bob or something adjacent to Bob, because Red Room be complicated.
Maybe it's Bob backwards. Bob.
Maybe it's just like, East Coast division of Bob.
Oh, no.
Robert.
Yeah, that's what the letters spell. And these dreams are very ominous for the mom, too, because there was a situation where she said that he almost got in the door. And then shortly after is when she ends up having a brain aneurysm and dying.
Yep.
So it's implied that there's a connection between these events, that him getting into the room led to her death in some way, or is a foreshadowing of the death, or something to that idea, that the figure is death in some way.
Yeah.
And I found to be the way that the death is described, I thought was very... I don't know how to really describe it. I thought it was very real and heartfelt and well handled on Scott Frost's part to really ground the emotions of this character at this age, losing this important of a person in his life, and sort of the desperation that comes into that.
Yeah.
Because even as she's dying, he's talking about how he still needs her there. He doesn't know what to do. She was just there. And when people are trying to comfort him, there's a Unitarian minister who's talking to Dale. And again, Dale's like 13 or 14 at this time.
Yeah.
The Unitarian minister says something about the spirit living on after death. And Dale just thinks that the man doesn't know what he's talking about. That he just is in such a state of loss right now that he doesn't really know how to believe in any form of spirit or goodness living on past the life.
And honestly, in a way that I think that it could be argued that there is a bit of living on. I'm not saying in a very Oedipal way, but I'm saying that perhaps even like trying to gain these overall relationships with women, if you will. And these
you can psychoanalyze him in that way.
Could be psychoanalyzed that way, yes. Which like there's something of
he's always trying to capture the love and protection of a woman.
Yes.
I think Diane is a particularly interesting one in there because Diane is one of two things. She's either removed from sexuality with Dale, or there is an element of it that is there, but also separate.
Yes.
Because the most of the time that he is talking to her, she's not even really listening, she's not even really there, but there's this comfort that he seeks in having this intelligent woman in conversation with him to sort out his feelings and thoughts. Very much like he might have done as a child, sharing his dreams and feelings with his mother. So I think if you look at Diane as a mother figure to Dale in some way, there's something to stand on there, which is why I prefer not to think of it as a sexual encounter personally. Weirdly, though, after the mother passes, Dale Cooper ends up having a dream where he's visited by her, and she seems younger, and she's trying to tell him something, but he couldn't hear her. And he woke up clutching a small gold ring, and he's not sure where it came from. Later, he talks to his dad. Later, he talks to his dad, and the dad's like, yep, she'd worn that ring years ago, and they should have stopped wearing it when they got married.
And then they get lost as far as the ring is concerned, don't even know where it ended up, and
now he has it. And when Dale graduates, he's left with the feeling that he doesn't know what to believe in anymore. He starts to question things more. He's calculating that by the time he would cross the ocean, or his first ocean, that the lightest of his mother's ashes, which had been put out to sea, would already be drifting out. So he does kind of like think in terms of his leaving of where his mother's ashes may be located around kind of the waterways of the world.
He gets pretty upset when a dam is built nearby there as well.
Yeah. And the other night, right before this, Dale wakes up to find his mother's ring back on his finger, and that's the point where he decides that's where it's going to stay. And we see that ring continue into the show of Twin Peaks, which is the ring that the giant takes away. Another figure associated with dreams taking away the ring, and it shows why Dale Cooper cares about that ring in the first place.
Otherwise, it's just like an interesting, like, oh, okay, well, you took some jewelry, but this actually, like, adds sentiment to an object.
I think this is a case where you can call me, a hypocrite, double standards, whatever. This is a case where I think the explanation adds more mystery and intrigue for me rather than takes away.
Yeah.
Diane being a person and having the Peking duck story, I find less interesting. Having this story with the ring, I'm compelled. I like that variation on it. Most of the other family members get very, very little in the story. One is Uncle Al, briefly mentioned. That Uncle Al is Dad's brother. He's a magician. He performs acts with dogs. Also, he has maybe kind of a shady reputation, where Dale kind of thinks that his father doesn't like him very much. He thinks that his dad views him as irresponsible and untrustworthy.
Yeah.
And it's Uncle Al that starts like teaching Dale Cooper like gambling tips that border on like not allowable.
Not allowable. These things also continue on, if you will. Like Dale Cooper just sees these as like potential mathematical equations, which later in Vegas gets him in trouble.
There's also Grandmother Cooper who ends up having a stroke and
Grandmother Cooper
who ends up having a stroke and dies early into the story after making a pie, a cherry pie. And the thing with pies, again, whatever, I might have missed some. But I counted 2 specifically to cherry pie references. Maybe there were 3, but I counted 2, with at least 6 other references to either pie or donuts. That's 8 pie/donut references. That's a lot to me. So I guess I feel like I'm more interested in Dale Cooper responding to the pie and donuts in Twin Peaks I'm more interested if he's not a fan of those things already than I am if he is. Because, and this is my, I know we don't agree on this point. We talked off pod about it. How I feel is that if it's some rando person who feels neutrally to, normal people's thoughts on cherry pie and donuts, they might like them. They're not in love with them. They're just like, whatever. But then you have one that's so good that it makes you think like, wow, this is where pies go when they die. This is so amazing. The sort of, kind of spontaneity of the event, it just seems so interesting in the moment to me. Whereas if it's someone who consistently for years of their life talks in terms of pie and donuts, goes to a town and rates their pies, to me it becomes more of a Dale Cooper quirk rather than a quirk of the town. And I prefer it being a quirk of the town. So I thought the 8 references to pie and donuts was too much.
I think that overall having references to it more often makes it seem like he is someone that, when he's traveling around, finds things that are comfortable with him. He finds things that overall he's familiar with, but also kind of like makes a scale on what it means to, say, for example, say, this is a place to go where pies go to die, because he's already familiar enough with it. As someone who's traveled around a fair amount myself, going from place to place, I know that there's some key foods I find for comfort, if you will, that's probably my main go-tos whenever I'm traveling. I personally enjoy things such as trying to find pizza, if you will, and compare pizzas. I'm someone who enjoys trying to find dessert. Most notably, I like finding shakes or just like a drinkable dessert item and so on. By far, I don't myself feel like I'm a critic, if you will, but I still have some favorite spots amongst my travels in which I keep in mind. And maybe that's just me drawing myself out of Cooper a bit more into that respects. But personally, no, I think I like the amounts that Sura goes to. I think that, yes, there is a point where, like, a couple gets a little bit heavy-handed, but beyond that, I think that the quirk of dealing with coffee with Dale Cooper and the way that his mannerisms goes makes sense. Donuts.
Coffee I'm with. I'm with coffee 100%.
Donuts is probably the closest thing to pair with coffee. Like, if you could think of one thing that goes with coffee, it's donuts. Like, that's just like the image of food that accompanies coffee. You got your Dunkin' Donuts out there and everything like that. But yes, I think pie is specific. I think pie is strange, but it's not something in which I'm going to, I don't believe a negative when it comes down to.
The cynical side of me just wants to, not even wants to, the cynical side of me just thinks of the book in terms of, it's like a checklist of references of things that we know about Cooper from the show and people like about Cooper. He's got to say damn fine at some point. He's got to talk about coffee. He's got to talk about donuts. Got to talk about cherry pie. It just feels like there's almost like a checklist of things to go through that this book ends up kind of acquiring.
And it can also be questionable on, like, what does pie even mean in the first place? Like, what is pie trying to emphasize in something such as Twin Peaks in general? Maybe like the emphasis of here, because it's shown already that Scott Frost, between his writings, seems to at least parallel certain ideas, if you will, that can be contextualized into the show in certain fashions. So, who knows?
The last family member that we get is brother Emmett, or Emmett. I keep saying Emmett. I know it's not his name.
It's Emmett.
It's
Emmett.
And Dale's brother Emmett is not a very large figure in the book because he's mostly distant. He does not make any physical appearances because he ended up fleeing, dodging the draft, going to Canada. And Mom's way of explaining it's like, oh, he went to be a lumberjack.
He won't be back until he cuts down all the trees.
And, Cooper, even at age 13, was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure he's just trying to avoid going to Vietnam. And that turns out to be the case, that he can't even go to his mother's funeral because if he crosses the border, he'll be arrested.
Yeah.
And one of Cooper's friends named Bradley says that Emmett was a coward, and that was why he went into Canada. And this response was, Dale smacks Bradley for like insulting his brother. He attacks his friend, but then wonders if he was right. Dale doesn't really know what to think of his brother's draft dodging.
And it's also notable later on in the story when he contacts his brother again, and he says how he's an FBI agent and is met with immediate resentment from his brother.
You're a tool of the establishment. It's very similar to what Marie had said before when he told Marie he met Hoover.
Yeah.
And there's a point early on when, he's still kind of wanting to be an FBI agent as a kid, that he ends up going to school, and there's this draft dodger who's like trying to claim like sanctuary at the school. And again, Dale feels like there's something wrong with this. He has at this young age this belief in authority and in the American government that someone who's running away from that, it's definitely not a positive association. It leans neutral going into negative. And as the years go by, he eventually just accepts that he's not going to be able to connect to his brother anymore. While Dale is in vacation in Canada, he seeks out his brother. He's going to try to find him, but he finds out that Emmett has already gone to South America, and he says that he fears that they are now strangers. He wishes it was otherwise, but he says that we have chosen a different path.
Yeah, at this point, you could all argue with, again, like his father's preoccupancy, the loss of his mother, and the fact that his brother is basically like gone in a relationship sense. It's three different dynamics that can craft loneliness in a person. Yeah. And I think that that's very emphasized in the Cooper that we see, that is constantly trying to grab at and find something that craves a sense of attachment.
I think the family's well written in this. I think that it's a good establishment. It makes sense. I think it contextualizes a lot of his life. Weird thing.
Wilbur.
Beep, beep, beep. That's the weird thing sonar. Clicking. So there are three things that we know Scott Frost was directed to include by David Lynch and Mark Frost. There are three things we have confirmation that Mark Frost and David Lynch told Scott to put in the book.
Okay.
One of them is to add Brother Emmett. So according to the Wrapped in Plastic podcast episode number 73, as cited by the 25 Years Later website, Cooper's older brother Emmett was a late addition to the book. That was brought up specifically by Lynch and Frost. I don't know if it was both of them, one of them, etc.
Is there any reference in any material we've covered so far that talks about Emmett other than this book?
To my knowledge, no.
Okay.
I could be forgetting something from Secret History, but I don't believe so. Secret History I've read once when it first came out many years ago.
No, we haven't covered we haven't covered that book yet, so more so media that we've covered
so far, no.
Okay.
I don't believe it all, no. Also from Wrapped in Plastic episode 73, young Dale Cooper's investigation into the effects of asparagus on his pee smell. That is also something that Frost and Lynch were very direct in, yes, put this in the book. The only connection I can make to that other people have made too, is that both Laura and Dale Cooper hate asparagus. Because that was in Laura's diary, like, I hate asparagus, does this mean they'll never grow up? So it's another Laura-Dale parallel that's so oddly specific that it's like kind of eyebrow-raising, like, okay, you need to include asparagus in your book. So that's where if you want to read the thing, like the Dale's mother is kind of like Laura's mother, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then the Wyndham Earl storyline was always meant to be in there, according to Lynch and Frost, and that would have been found in the Brad Dukes interviews. They've talked about that, which to me that's the least surprising, because if you're writing a book about Dale Cooper's past, I'm not surprised he was told he had to talk about Wyndham Earl. That makes total sense to me. It's the asparagus and Emmett that are interesting, I guess, to me.
Yeah.
There might be more things they were specifically told. Those are just the ones that are more public from what I was reading.
Okay. So other than asparagus pea, there's plenty of free reign probably throughout the entire childhood of overall Dale Cooper then.
Presumably. From what we have access to knowing, for all we know. Maybe some missing pieces in there. And we do get a bit about Dale Cooper's childhood. A few strange mannerisms. First of all, it's the way he talks, right? As a 13-year-old who just got his first recorder, he talks very much like he does as an adult. And, I mean, when we were talking about The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer, we noticed that 12-year-old Laura Palmer sounded pretty similar to 17-year-old Laura Palmer.
Yeah.
And maybe there should have been more typos in her diary. Maybe she should have had certain ways of wording things that sounded more like a child. I'm less bothered by that with the Cooper diary because Cooper is already a weirdo. I'm willing to kind of believe he talked weird as a kid. But then also it's an audio recording. You're not going to have typos in an audio recording. He just talked very formally.
This is someone who sees high regard for individuals such as Hoover and so on, who overall wants to be involved in the FBI, who sees a tape recorder as a great opportunity. The fact that the premise of this overall book is someone recording their life over tapes, if you will. The very nature of Cooper, I think, doesn't seem like a very, I'll just vlog everything that's happened to me here, talking my thing, ha, 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 ha. I think keeping a similar flow and dialogue with some mild differences is to a benefit for the book, more so than not.
He may not be a poet, but he is very specific with his words and with his choice of language and how he presents his thoughts.
Yes.
Very introspective, even as a child, and very articulate. the only people who can enter Dale's room are people who know his password.
Which changes frequently.
And at the beginning of the book, when he gets his recorder, it's Dark Passage.
Don't look into it. It's fine.
Don't peer into the darkness. Stare into the abyss long enough. Something Nietzsche quote. Don't do it.
Stare into the darkness and Friedrich Nietzsche will quote at you.
Yes, exactly. Dale reports disliking birds, which of course could link into owls. And then also later mentions specifically not liking big bugs with wings. So just big winged creatures he's not a big fan of. Also, Dale read it in a science book that electricity is what keeps us alive. Quote, I do not understand where it comes from and where it goes when we are dead. Dad said that was the big question. He did not know the answer. Neither do I. So the idea of electricity in the body leaving us when we die. Where does it go?
It's heavily like, this is something which like you would easily like sort of like grab by the overall throat and just sort of like flail around, being like, hey, red room,
right?
If you will, or anything really like David Lynch that incorporates anything like electricity being a very soul-like spiritual nature, if you will.
Then also, this was before Fire Walk with Me, so...
This was very lightly before Fire Walk with Me.
Would he have been told to include electricity by David Lynch, or was he picking up on that on his own? I don't know. Mm-hmm. But it is very on the nose for what we get later.
Yeah, electricity happens multiple times.
It does, but it's more in Fire Walk with Me than it is in the main series.
It is.
It's like telephone poles and, you know... It's more specifically in there.
He was getting ready and he watched all the other movies beforehand too.
Yeah, maybe. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised out. Yeah, like I was saying before, he's interested in the FBI from a young age. He looks up to FBI agents in movies, got big old posters of that. He reading Sherlock Holmes and aspires to be like that great literary detective. Mm-hmm. So even at age 13, when he gets his first tape recorder, Christmas 1967, he's already ready to put it to use right away.
Yeah.
He once that stuff gets stolen, he goes after the 24th Street gang in his neighborhood and tries to get them to confess on tape to things. He, obviously don't do that. That's going to get yourself hurt. But he's already got that sort of investigative, adventurous spirit that would carry on later in life.
Mm-hmm. I also will note that when it comes to his childhood, for one, it's great to sort of map out for age because his birthday, April 19th, is noted inside the overall book. He mentions his birthday, but the birthdays are far more frequently mentioned during his childhood. After that 3-year gap happens and into his adulthood, every time there's hardly a point where April 19th really ever comes up.
To be fair though, for adults, usually interest in their birthdays does usually decline.
Interest in their birthdays, perhaps.
As a kid, it's a big deal when you turn a certain age.
It is, but also how many individuals does he really get to celebrate with them whenever it comes down to those points? And B, it was at least important enough to bring up, of course, when he was in childhood. It's just that weird 3-year gap is when it just sort of came to an end.
Yeah. So enamored is Dale Cooper in FBI that he writes a letter to J. Edgar Hoover about deciding to become an FBI agent at the earliest possible date. He admits in the letter to having audio taped a girls' sex ed class for scientific purposes and invites Hoover to talk with him about the audio tapes very confidently. Hoover congratulates him on the taping of the girls' sex ed class and encourages him not to be discouraged by the getting caught.
If only there were more people like you.
If only there were more people who would not respect the boundaries of their peers and were willing to sabotage and commit secret acts to spy on them for scientific purposes. You're the kind of 14-year-old we need in the FBI.
Yep.
Please join immediately.
Yep. We're only lightly paraphrasing.
It's only lightly. And Dale gets invited by Hoover to go meet a real agent to a special tour in Washington. Mm-hmm. And Dale goes. And at which point he outpoints an actual agent at a gun range. Showing an incredible adept ability to shoot, or the other guy just sucked. I don't know if it's ever...
He's able to correct it as well.
Yeah.
As well, just saying here's where your fault is, and he's like, don't tell the other agents about this, please.
Unless Dale's father taught him how to shoot a gun from his military experience, I don't know how Dale is that good of a shot. I don't think it's ever clarified why Dale can do that.
I think that there are points inside of the book that lead into Dale's natural intuition and adaptation to things that is emphasized more so inside of other people's perspectives at like the beginning of chapters and so on. That could be argued for that. I don't know how much like his father really goes to the gun range. There's never a moment inside the
I feel like
book.
he wouldn't want his kid shooting a gun after his experiences at the war. I
Yeah.
don't think he would. That's why it feels like that doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah.
You could argue like genetically, spiritually, intuitionally.
Speared gun.
He Yu Yu Hakusho'd the situation to death. Yeah, and going back to that intuition idea though, one day Dale meets a man named George. Well, he doesn't meet a man named George. He was around a man named George, who I think he had previously met, worked at his dad's shop. And George got his hand accidentally caught in one of the presses, and Dale immediately applied pressure to the bleeding to stop it. He said the bleeding was shooting out of the wrist like a drinking fountain. He also, when no one else wanted to pick it up, he picked up the hand on the ground, and he described it like his body was, quote, injected with electricity. Can you feel it?
I can feel it, Mr. Krabs.
Can you feel it?
I can feel it, Mr. Krabs.
That electricity.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, young Coop, young Sheldon here. He has a sort of intuition, spiritual guidance from his mother. He's got sort of values and free-thinking spirit from his father. He has complex thoughts on draft dodgers and moral ambiguities. His feelings towards sex are very complicated by a sense of fear that he's going to be impure now to join the Boy Scouts and reach the heights he can reach.
Which honestly, that's kind of adorable.
He's got ambition, he's got drive, and Hoover's encouraging it, so we're going to go for it. And all this kind of sets up Dale for when in 1970 he tests out of graduating school, he meets all the requirements, and he is kind of at a crossroads. He doesn't know what he's going to do with his life, and he just goes off the radar for 3 years, basically. Dale sends letters to his dad on the January 1st of each year, from 1971, 1972, and 1973. 1 letter per year, and that's all we really have of a record of what happened to Cooper. And he was following his dad's advice on the way out of town, where his dad said very vaguely, and maybe Cooper knows what he meant. Maybe this is the thing that his dad and him talked about all the time. But to us reading the tapes, we only have this vague notion of watch out for bad water and watch out for snakes. So the entries that we get from Cooper, 1971, he says, first year the water was bad, saw no snakes. 1972, second year the snakes were very bad, but the water was good. And then 1973, stopped looking. Dale. And that's it. So, what do you think the snakes and the water are?
I'm drawing a blank here, honestly.
Okay, because it's very code language.
It is very code language. I have no experience with overall this style of code. I don't know if there's anything we could look up military-wise, or if it's something that's sort of like that metaphorical three-thinker style.
Hey, listener.
Hey,
listener. If you know what snakes and water are, specifically bad water and snakes, feel free to email us at snakeeyedreams@gmail.com.
Or tweet at us at snakeeyedreams1, the numeral 1, as in... I got nothing, not a single one.
I let you take control.
No, I've got nothing. I got not a single one.
Oh, that's what you're doing.
Yes.
It's so high above my head. I am lost. Just like I am lost about the code. And Dale later says he'll make no attempt to record the events of the prior 3 years other than to say that, quote, the whole universe is one bright pearl, and there is no need to understand it.
This is one of the most hopeful things that comes out of Dale.
Yeah. You don't understand it? That's fine. You don't need to. That is, I guess, a form of solace one could have. When Dale Cooper returns, he is very much a changed Dale. One of his friends and a minister, Bradley Schlerman, that would be assumably the brother then of Marie.
Yeah.
Bradley Schlerman says, I'm assuming he has a certain voice I'm just going to do, okay? There he was, standing on the corner of Germantown Road in a black suit. I could tell right away that this was not the same Dale I had seen 3 years earlier. He seemed older, stronger, and his eyes had an intensity I'd never seen before. I remember asking him how the trip had been, and all he said was, "Damn good. I don't know what it was." that he saw her dead out there, but it was obviously a very powerful experience. I can only imagine that it was something like a car accident that started me on the road to ministry.
I don't know why you decided that this person should be fellatioing a Slim Jim as he's talking, but good show.
Classic Bradley. Classic Bradley. And he basically comes back to town like he's had a religious experience. He's suddenly way more confident, way more poised. He doesn't have his life figured out. He's still kind of in a limbo state right now. He says that the things he's interested for sure are in the circus, puzzles, and sex.
Yep.
We get more of one of those than the other two. Leave you to speculate.
Puzzles.
Puzzles. Just like Bradley was puzzling that the jerky. Anyway, Cooper does comment on the earlier FBI dreams, and now he's a little bit more disillusioned. He said that, I know that it had been my intention for many years to enter into the service of the FBI. I must admit that my experience of the past several years does not lend itself to the belief that goodness can or will defeat evil. This is not a pessimistic view, but simply an observation of facts as I have experienced them. So this is kind of at a crossroads where he feels like he's been around the world in those 3 years or been to different places where he's not convinced that good can defeat evil. Do you think Cooper was right in this moment? Because he later goes back and says love can conquer. He later changes his mind yet again. But at this moment, he's like, you can't understand the world. It's a giant mystery. I can't even put into words where I've been. What I can say, though, is I'm not so confident good can defeat evil anymore.
Well, that's the big part, isn't it? It really depends on one's perspective whenever it comes to good and evil. I know that's a pretty sparing, statement.
Well, what's your perspective?
In the case of, Twin Peaks and the usage of evil, it seems, for the most part, evil is a predator and good is a prey, if you will. It is something in which something looms over and it has to be corrupted or tainted, if you will. And there's not much other people can do. It's very much can be considered almost Lovecraftian in the very dismal reality that they end up living in, because nothing ends up sort of winning out or staying good in the presence of something trying to prey upon it, if you will.
I don't remember what it's called. It's not deism. I was trying to look it up and I'm not sure, but the theology of there being a God, but the God is actively indifferent to human suffering, does not care about the creation. That's almost the way Twin Peaks feels. At worst, you've got things like Bob that are actively enjoying toying with people and just seem to do it for the giggles. And then at best, you've got figures like the Giant or Mike, who might use people as pawns in some unforeseen greater game. But I don't know if we're necessarily convinced that they're good in OG Twin Peaks. The way that the Giant and the Man from Another Place kind of seem to be connected by the idea of the arm, I don't know if this is the arm of good people, the arm of bad people. It seems, again, at best indifferent. Neutral might be the best you're going to get in Twin Peaks. And in the face of these sort of things, you can't defeat the cosmic evil that seems to be out there. It seems like Dale Cooper, the moment he enters the Red Room at the end of season 2, it's not a hero going to go slay the monster. It is someone caught in a trap and in a maze and is being actively played with. They're playing with their food, is what it feels like to me. Whether they is Bob or whether they is Bob and the other entities of the lodge. But it doesn't feel like it's even close to being a competition or a survival. It is Dale running around completely lost and clueless. So there's the evil that's kind of the cosmic sense. Then there's the evil of the natural world. You know, as an FBI agent, as a law enforcement agent, he can try to fight the small-time evils of a specific case. And I say small-time loosely. You could be trying to stop a serial killer, right? You could be trying to stop someone who's actively dangerous in the world. But if he's trying to think about stopping evil in terms of the nightmare figures of his dreams, that is something he may not have the power to fight. And it depends on what evil he's talking about here. Is he more concerned with, can good defeat evil? In what way? Like on a sliding scale of the world? They're trying to balance the force like Star Wars? What does he mean?
It doesn't ever seem like it is like a concrete, like this person specifically, or like these sort of like entities that are physical and is ever like the context. Whenever it comes to the context, it's usually for things that are outside of his overall control.
Because most FBI agents and law enforcement, I don't think go in with the idea of trying to stop evil.
Yeah.
I think they go in with the sense of we're going to try to help people. You know, I mean, obviously there's some people who are more cynical than that, but I think those who have more of those intentions are thinking in the terms of like, you can't help everyone, you can't stop every criminal, but you can try to do what you can to bring those to justice, to get justice done for families, to try to protect people. And that's usually what you do, protect and serve. Cooper seems to want to protect and serve, but then also become like an Arthurian knight and, you know, conquer evil with holy powers. And it's the additional aspect that I think is, more questionable. Because in the short term, he seems to be effective at his job if he's not, you know, cursed at the same time. Around this time of limbo land, when he's not really sure what to do, he has this job where he's digging holes for trees to be planted in. And he's really enjoying it. He's having a good time. And while he's working this job, he meets a man named Jim. Jim is a really interesting side character. Not in there for very long, but super memorable and weird.
Yeah. No.
Agreed?
No, agreed. He gets to know overall Jim. He gets to know Jim by name, and there's eventually a point where Jim actually like brings him to his home, if you will, and shows it off, in which was like a single light bulb, a bed, and effectively like papers and pages and pages and pages of something that Jim was writing for quite some time.
I'm wondering, what color do you think the light bulb was? I think it's incandescent, red, or blue?
I've been playing too much Amori, so black.
Black light, okay. What do you think was written on these pieces of paper?
As far
he calls it remembrances.
Remembrances, I'm thinking it's like a memoir, if you will, or if anything, just like something akin to a memoir, just like things that are just more so his life, his personal life, like things that have gone on, things that show that he had existed. In fact, that's one of the sort of lines that he sort of like lets Cooper know that, like, one reason for bringing him there is that someone knows. You're the first one to actually know about this. Maybe not to like read it outright, but at least someone is aware that someone named Jim did these things.
Speaking of things Jim did,
burn, fire.
So when Dale is on the way back, he then realizes Jimmy Neutron brain blast that, wait a second, the reason this guy told me all this, oh snap. So he goes all the way back, and by the time he's there, the place is already burned down. He set fire to all of it, and all that paper that was in there made the fire go big and go fast. But they were not able to determine any sort of remains that were there, and it would take more of a forensic examination of the room to turn up those remains due to the state of that room. Dale was not convinced that they would find any remains, however. He seemed to be convinced that this man had not, in fact, perished in the fire, is my understanding, right? So Dale is thinking that they're not going to find remains because this man was not in the room when it went down.
It's so weird for his overall just general disappearance that who's to say, especially with how interesting Twin Peaks makes
fire.
Not just fire, but just like people and existing and people being around. He could have been a doorknob and burnt. He could have been... He could have just sort of like disappeared, if you will, right around the corner, if you will. He may have ran away from it, and this was just more so an act of finality. It's left very open-ended.
And making it even more confusing is that after he is watching these firemen wrap up their hoses, there's this shadow of a man that Cooper sees, faintly visible for an instant in an alley across the street. And he hears what he thought at first was to be the muffled sound of crying, but then as he moved closer, he realized it was actually laughter. And when he reached the alley where the sound had come from, it was empty. Cooper called out, searching up and down, to no avail, and all that was there left was a freshly sharpened pencil where the laughter had come from. And Cooper suspects that as a message. So I would take that as a hint to be most likely one of two things. One, the person who wrote those little messages, Jim, did not burn in the fire. That was him in the alleyway, him doing the crying, laughing. He leaves the pencils, an indication to Cooper. The author of the messages is still alive. I am around. Alternatively, it could be a Black Logian kind of spirit entity thing where it's like laughing, enjoying the pain and sorrow, and it's more of like a taunt, the leaving of the pencil.
It could be like even paralleled, if you will, the Garmonbosia. Garmonbosia is something in which like is the misery before it becomes the joy of something else. It's something that's transformed. if you will, before a pencil's left behind. Maybe it could be something in which, like, Jim is Laura Palmered away, and Jim exists.
It's also like
in
parallels
that way.
with Harold. We've talked about that before.
Harold, yeah.
What happened there? Was that Harold's actions he died by, or was that interference? And I think with the Harold situation is actually a pretty good comparison, because most likely, with what we have, it probably was natural causes. It probably does not have any spiritual stuff. But it's just open enough that it could be. And that's, I think, where this kind of sits too.
Yeah.
What do you think was the point of this Jim section? Because it doesn't come back.
It doesn't come back.
Jim is left an anomaly. It's one of the most mysterious things in the whole book. Why is Jim here?
Jim is here, for one, to establish an additional connection inside of Cooper's life. Maybe not like another like physical relationship, but whenever it comes to almost any relationship in Cooper's life, any sort of like idea of closeness ends up sort of being dampened, if you will. He has something in which is invoking a potential connection that might overall affect his overall path in life, if you will, as he gets to know someone before that person is whisked away and Cooper is led on his single path file. In fact, like, what sort of like friends or allies really stays by Cooper throughout the journey of this book, really. I think that, one, it adds to the tragedy of the character. Two, I think it adds to emphasizing that darkness. And number three, I think that it is something that could be spiritually taken away with Cooper as he continues his own personal quest. So...
And on that personal quest, Dale Cooper gets drawn further and further into what would later become his FBI career, a resurgence of that interest in fighting against evil. Dale ends up following a suspicious person, and by following this person, finds a woman's body. And he becomes very aware that the woman who had been stabbed was killed by someone who was close by and could have gotten him as well, that he could have been the next victim. And putting it in Cooper's words, he said, "What I felt at that time I now realize was more than terror or shock. I firmly believe that the killer was within striking distance of myself and could easily have claimed me as his second victim. This is not intuition. The presence of the killer was as real as the shaking in my hand at this moment. I do not understand the dark forces that result in so much brutality, but I know that it is a real thing, and is out there at this very moment. I must find someone who can help me understand and fight this. But who?" And then shortly later on in the story, Dale ends up having a 103-degree fever. He's kind of in this troubled place, but in his fevered state, he is still able to kind of reach some conclusions that he feels that it's not nearly an infection that was attacking his body during this time, but also somehow he says the evil that took a life of the young woman and was in striking distance of taking his own, that evil existed almost in a tangible form, and he's questioning if evil can be like a germ. Does it float as a feather? He asks if evil can move in and out of all of our lives and occasionally take root on unfortunate souls, which, of course, that makes me think of Bob being a parasite. Dale asks, if that is true, quote, "then the battle that took place within my body was not viral in origin, but a struggle for my very soul. And this time I won." Which hangs in the sort of implication that what if he doesn't win? What becomes of him then? So, again, more ominous elements in his life that seem to suggest to him that evil is a very real corporeal thing. Not just that, people do bad things, but like there is actively a presence of evil. That it is not simply the absence of good, but is the presence of something else entirely, of that sort of predatory element and instinct. What do you think? Because to me, it seems like something's wrapping its coils around Cooper more and more. I sense a sort of constriction, whether it's Bob or the Lodge or something else entirely.
It's complicated for me because I'm looking at all these instances and freak accidents that occur, if you will, and again, if we go into this like cosmic sense of evil and so on, no matter what, it seems that almost like Cooper is being brought forward onto the singular path that will eventually lead to his own demise. A very long-running one, if you will, very drawn out, but I mean, I don't know how much time these overall entities could ever have whenever it comes to like a concept such as evil, like a vague concept of like beings of evil that might again be wrapping their tendrils around Cooper and so on. Because at the end of the day, imagine at any point when like evil is like even just starting like peek in, if you will, from far, far away.
Twin Peak in.
Twin Peak in. At any of these points on how drastically different Cooper's life may have been. Say, for example, if the chaos that had happened with Mary, if like things had worked out better with overall Mary between him and her, may have solidified them inside that spot, or involved Cooper more inside of her life, including her not being alone to her own demise. For the amount that his mother would be around, if she was around more, whether or not like he would be like wanting as much as he would of like a overall close relationship that would overall put him on towards a steady straight and narrow. Whether or not, say for example, that the love that turned around for the Point of Holland, on whether or not, say for example, what paths Cooper would have taken with Andy, with April, if this worked out. The list goes on and on and on, in which him specifically ending up with the FBI, him ending up on this path trying to embrace this overall good nature despite everything, and him constantly trying to do his best to try to fulfill something within him. I'm curious on what any of these like instances where fire pops up on if he would still be on that path, you know?
Speaking of fire, 9 months of Dale Cooper's tapes are destroyed from a fire of an electric blanket igniting.
What do you know?
What do you know? Fire. It's so consistent. It's so consistent. If we sound like broken records, it's because the book does the same thing.
Yep.
And it's again, either Lynch suggested it or this was something that Scott Frost independently also wanted to do. But it is a consistent element. And, part of me also wonders and plays with the idea, not that I'm fully compelled, not that I'm saying it's the end-all be-all, but playing with the idea that, is he being lured? Is Dale Cooper even now being lured in the direction of what would happen at the end of season 2?
Because I think it's even less being lured, if anything. It's more so any other sort of like paths or options have, for the most of his part in life, been walled away. It's almost as if...
No, that's what I mean. I mean lured. I mean like
instead of like being like tempted towards the end, there's only like one path.
He's got invisible walls blocking his path. He's got invisible
walls that keep on popping up in the way.
Because like I believe that like looking at season 2, Wyndham Earle was a lure. Annie, according to the Welcome to Twin Peaks book, is also a literal fishing lure.
Yeah.
Annie and Wyndham Earle, I think, were lures. I think Wyndham Earle thought he was in control. He had no control, though. The moment he gets into the lodge, Bob takes his soul.
But I think that when Cooper, at this point, like when he gets to Twin Peaks, that's the end of the road. I think that inevitability of leading towards that final path, there was then... Cooper is now inside of this little pond at this point. He is inside of the perfect spot in which he's made it out of the tunnel, but it's not to any place great.
I guess I feel like at the beginning of the show of Twin Peaks, I'm not convinced that the end goal of Cooper being lured into the lodge and being whatever happens to him at the season 2 finale, obviously not good. I don't think that was intentional from the beginning. But by the time that My Life, My Tapes was being written, I think they had an idea of that's where it was going to go. At least Lynch would have. So I don't think it's a stretch to believe that this book is retroactively painting a picture of Dale Cooper having all of his options being removed, snuffed out, and what he's left with is kind of this winding road that eventually leads him to fight an evil that's going to get him captured by evil. That even when he's a 14-year-old, there might be elements working through that person trying to get into the door of his dreams. Bob might already have been there when he was 14. And this is where I think this book has such huge implications for Twin Peaks if you take it to be canon.
Yeah.
Laura Palmer, we know that Bob visited her when she was a child. We know that Bob was around her. But you also can say, well, she lived with Leland. She literally lived in the same household as Bob. And whenever Bob appears, how much of that is Bob, how much of that's Leland, et cetera, et cetera. With Dale Cooper, if we associate that entity in the dreams and the darkness that's looming over him of being lodge spirit related, this means that he has been just as much maneuvered as Laura Palmer was if not even more so.
Mm-hmm.
And Laura Palmer, I think a lot of people, myself included, would say that in Fire Walk with Me, she succeeded, I think. Like, I think when she put on the ring, I do believe that she stopped Bob from possessing her. It left Bob with no choice but to kill her. That's my interpretation. There's a lot of interpretations of that. And this could change. I could, in a year from now, have a completely different idea. Because Dale Cooper says in Fire Walk with Me, don't take the ring. But she does. And when she takes the ring, she's killed by Bob. She ends up with the angel, the lights on her face. Read it however you want. I personally think that she made a move for the little bit of control that she had in her short life to not let Bob win. I like to believe that in my mind, she stopped Bob from taking control, which was worse than death.
Which...
With Dale Cooper, I don't think passed his test, based on the ending of season 2. Again, not looking at anything else, just looking at what we've got so far.
Looking at what we've got so far, my only argument with that is that both Cooper as well as Laura end up in the same place nonetheless.
And not that could be a bigger statement.
Not to mention the fact that Bob's presence, dealing with, say, for example, the man from another place as well as the one-armed man.
If at this point you haven't already come to the conclusion, I think you're probably getting close to it, that would suggest, along with a lot of other Twin Peaks media, is that it's not the gifted and the damned as two different sections.
Yeah.
It's the gifted and the damned in their one category. They are both. Cooper and Laura are gifted and damned.
Yes.
Sarah Palmer is gifted and damned.
Yep.
It's hard to find someone who's not both. If they
find you someone who can do both.
Last thing, just a quick little side note, because I want to bring it up for those who care. During the college life section of the book, Dale Cooper briefly is interested in psychology, and Professor Margaret Hastings says that he would have been a brilliant psychiatrist if he had taken up that instead. Hastings. I wanted to point that out because when we read Welcome to Twin Peaks, there was another, when they went through the football players, there was a Hastings on the football team. I said put a pin in that. This is not removing the pin. Add another pin on top of the pin. There is now a pin in the name Hastings with another pin pinning the pin down. That name is in both these books.
I'll also bring up with Hastings, if you will, that quote, things may have been different if it wasn't for an instant. If you want to add another woman to Cooper's life, there's Betty, who during the time of the institution, Cooper becomes more acclimated to overall communicate with Betty.
And she views him as an angel here to kill her.
Yep. That's also not the only time in which something mythical is seen within Cooper inside this book. Yeah. But mind you, it's through this series of events with Betty, especially when it comes to Betty's death, while he's trying to calm down the situation and she's gunned down. Hastings believes that otherwise Cooper could have been that psychiatrist. Again, his options are narrowing thanks to fantastical events.
Professor, her name is Betty, and Betty's also the name of Bobby's mother, Betty Briggs, and she's reading the Book of Revelations, and that involves vengeful angels. Are you sure that Betty is not Betty Briggs? Huh? And Andy is in fact Andy, and Anne is in fact Anne. Are you sure?
I feel like there could be potentially areas of parallel, but not that far.
I'm just joking with you.
I know,
Giving you
but
a hard
still.
time. Giving you a hard time.
Freaking Revelations.
You know what I'm not going to give you? Tick-tock, dear listeners. I'm afraid we've nearly run out of time for today. Parting is such sweet sorrow, especially when Agent Dale Cooper has so much to lose. Our brave hero, this intrepid knight in shining armor, has finally achieved his lifelong dream of becoming an FBI agent. It almost brings a tear to our eyes. But I am pleased to note, our story does not end in this place of relative peace, for there is someone whose story has not been told in full, and it would be improper to not give him his due, especially on the eve of his awakening. This person I speak of is known as Wyndham Earle, and he has other ideas for our dear Agent Dale Cooper. Until next time, dear listeners, tick-tock, tick